this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to miamighostchronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogman, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. How's everybody doing? Good, I hope. I know the show's going to be a little bit staggered, but see, I already have my Halloween t-shirt on. Right now, we're like, what? Today's the 27th. We're 4 days out from Halloween. And even though I know you guys might hear this after the fact, remember that, I'm going to say it again. I'm going to do a Halloween live stream this year. Okay, like I did last year. And, everybody had been asking me, what are you going to do? Because, and I did the one for Mardi Gras. And everybody wanted that true crime angle that I did with Mardi Gras. And I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to go 70s, 80s nostalgia, when Halloween was like really Halloween. But I'm going to throw the true crime angle into it, which back then a lot of the stuff was what they call the satanic panic. And we'll find out if really it was panic after all, because I've been looking at some of these stories, which of course we're talking, 40, 50 years old, almost, depending, we're looking at the 70s or 80s. And you could tell by the way they were written back then, they were branding them, in other words, when they were writing these stories, as they were, from the moment victims are being found, and then we fast forward into the story and how they find who was responsible or the trial. You know what? They didn't put the Satan or satanic thing in there just arbitrarily, like, oh, we're going to make it. No, you could tell that the writers of the piece, the journalists back then, basically were attaching it based on what they had found, when the crime was committed. This wasn't like, oh, they put the satanic panic. No, there was one that I'm going to talk about, which is they found the guy, an altar, with all these satanic symbols. So it's like, there was no panic here. Whether these people, there was reason why to call them satanic or satanic cult murders or things like that. But okay, we'll get into that one. You're gonna have to watch me live on Halloween. And again, even though I'm broadcasting that as a live stream, I'm going to upload it though as a recorded show later on, on all the video platforms, and of course a podcast version of it. Again, reminder, don't forget, sign up for my articles and my newsletter on Substack. Again, on there, I put everything from new projects, new books, giveaways like I did with the last book I released, which was Phantoms of the Follies. That was released October 4th. And matter of fact, I gave five days worth of free Kindle books on that title just to celebrate the release. And I usually will mention it here, but really, if you want up to date, when I do the giveaways, the newsletter is how I usually announce that. That's the best bet. All right. And like I said, I usually have podcasts. I have older podcasts, and I just put all funky, weird articles, things like that. Whatever, maybe 2-3 times a week, the most sometimes. And of course, don't forget to visit me at eerie.news. And there I also have articles. And I do, even though I've been a little bit, because I've been so busy with this Halloween thing, I'll usually do a podcast as far as all the interesting news of the paranormal or anything weird, just unusual. Doesn't really have to be paranormal. Could be ancient archaeology, just weird stuff. Believe me. And this is the thing. Sometimes we get caught up in modern, what can I say, news and stuff like that. Yeah, that can be disturbing in and of itself, but there's a lot of other stuff going on in the world that it falls into the unusual realm, and that's what I talk about on Eerie.news. But anyway, guys, let's get on to the good part. The good part is who the guest is tonight. This gentleman, this is the first time here on Stories of the Supernatural, and his name is Christopher Balzano. He is a writer, researcher, folklorist, and current host of the podcast Tripping on Legends. He's been documenting the unexplained since 1994, and he's been a figure in the paranormal world through his books, articles, and his work as a director of Massachusetts Paranormal Crossroads and now Tripping on Legends. He is the author of several books about regional hauntings, dark woods, cult crimes, and the paranormal in the Freetown State Forest and ghosts of the Bridgewater Triangle, which we're going to be talking about, as well as a collection of true ghost stories, ghostly adventures, and the how-to paranormal book, Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting and Picture Yourself Capturing Ghosts on Film. His most recent book, Haunted Objects, Stories of Ghosts on Your Shelf, captures the stories of everyday people who have accidentally allowed spirits into their house. Even though I don't know, we'll ask him about this. He just brought out recently a haunted house, a haunted ghost stories about the Ocala National Forest, which is very close to where I'm at. Anyway, he's been a contributor to Jeff Belanger's Encyclopedia of Haunted Places and Weird Massachusetts and was one of the writers behind Weird Hauntings. He's appeared in more than a dozen other books, often called in to offer insight into the paranormal and gain perspective on a certain case. He's appeared on radio stations across the country and throughout the internet, as well as being called upon by television shows to comment on ghost and urban legends, including the British television series Conversations with a Serial Killer. He's been a guest on Coast to Coast AM and has been asked as a consultant on television shows like Paranormal State and Ghost Adventures. He formerly ran the Paranormal News Ghost Village for Kids from Ghost Village, one of the oldest and largest websites dedicated to the paranormal, and is the content director of the popular paranormal radio show Spooky South Coast. Help me welcome him today. How are you doing, Chris?
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, your bio is a little bit old school.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm into I tell everybody, I know I'm supposed to be like, okay, Marlene, we get it. I tell them I was doing investigations when you had to pay to develop film. You know,
yeah.
use as reference because people, don't ever think. You mean you had to actually pay? Yeah. Once upon a time, you actually paid sometimes for a big blob of nothing.
Right, exactly. Yeah, but what I was referring to though is that like that bio of mine's probably at least 8 years old that you've got.
Really, you know what? I noticed.
It's okay. It was like walking back through memory lane. I'm like, wow, remember when Haunted Objects was a book that people wanted to buy, and it's been
you know what
for a few years. So
there's always audiences that all of a sudden, their interest in the paranormal surges. And it's like a brand new to them. It's brand new.
To them, it's brand new. Yeah. I do have two more recent books. The first one, because I'm now a Florida person, and
right.
So I have two books in the Haunted America series. One would be Haunted Florida Love Stories, and the other is the Haunted Ocala National Forest. So
yes.
There are definitely two other titles to me that are kind of relevant to what we're talking about. Seeing
right.
that,
and I'm gonna get to that because I live very, very close to Ocala National Forest, which is a really large park. Let me ask you, but I'm going to ask you what I ask all my guests. How did you get interested into the paranormal?
Okay, so that your intro where you're showing the movie with the girl's face melting?
Yes.
That movie was crucial in my development in this. And I'm not even joking. I'm watching it and I'm having flashbacks to my childhood. Because that's what Saturdays were, you know what I'm saying? So
yes.
For me, Saturdays were Creature Double Feature on Channel 56 out of Boston, Massachusetts. And that movie seemed to show like every other day, every other week. It was this obsession I had with horror movies and things like that. And I was a latchkey kid.
Okay.
But my latch was the public library. So my mom would force me to walk to the library after school, and then she would pick me up hours later. And so I just consumed everything, and I drifted towards those old, and they're kid versions originally of ghost stories and haunted folklore and things like that.
Right, yeah.
The librarian, who I think was basically sick of me, said, at like 10 years old, you can go upstairs and read the adult stuff now. And so,
well, you know what? People don't realize that a lot of libraries back then in the kids section, they would put a lot of the ghost stuff in there. Because it was considered like ghost children's material.
Yeah, and it was pretty tame.
Yeah.
But it was the gateway, right? So it was the gateway drug for me to go upstairs. By that time, you know, I'm a 70s, early 80s kid. By that time, Stephen King was in the movies. And so I started reading all the Stephen King books, but then things like the Time Life series came out, and I was just obsessed, but also because the way my brain works even today, I just kept all that information in there. So when I started at my college dorm in Boston, Emerson College was haunted.
Really?
And so people would tell me stories all the time about things that they had happen. And then I would ask them the backstory, and they'd say, you know, something like, oh, well, what happened is that one student killed another student, and then they put them in the closet, and then she transferred schools, and they didn't find the body till 3 weeks. I'm like, wait a minute, I've heard that exact same story like in 5 different towns. And so I became obsessed with this idea of the crossroads, which is, you know, not only the real haunting or what might be something unusual, paranormal, supernatural going on, but then the stories we make up or the stories
urban legend kind of thing
to try to explain it. Exactly. And both are both should be honored, right? Both should be held up.
Sure.
And so, you know, after years of doing this, and I was an investigator for years, I kind of just got and left all of the pseudoscience behind of investigating and focus more on the experience over evidence, and getting back to what was the heart of the haunting, getting back to these crazy backstories and how they connect. And what I started doing was much more of like what we call legend tripping, which is going to the site, experiencing it just the way the people of that town or that area or that community say it happens, and then looking at what is that story and how they tell it say about the community as much as what does it say about the ghosts.
Right, because a lot of these experiences where people had them, there was none of this stuff that I hate to say it. You know, some of these paranormal reality shows, there's just too much. And I know what they're trying to do is capture the evidence or whatever, make it interesting. But after a while, exactly like what you say, it almost kind of loses a little bit of the romanticism of the story, you know.
And it loses the romanticism of the story. And then it also makes the person who's going and looking at these things. I didn't grow up wanting to listen to EVPs or to get EMF meter reading. I grew up in awe. And I think that legend tripping, as opposed to investigating, brings back the sense of awe and the paranormal.
Sure.
Because whether some place is haunted or not, I always say people can agree or disagree whether ghosts are real, but a ghost story is always true because people say it and believe it.
Of course.
Right?
And what every legend tripper hopes for is like, I'm going to have an experience, but just the anticipation, even if you don't, is worth it because, you know, you've heard this story, that story, and you're thinking maybe I'll be the one that's going to hear, see, whatever.
Exactly. And when you hear a story that has been told and retold in a community, and maybe even talk to a few people that day in the community who recount their versions of it, and then it's nighttime and you're on that stretch of road and you're flashing your lights the way you're supposed to, or you're knocking on that mausoleum 3 times the way you're supposed to, for you not to have that sense of, I know exactly what they're talking about, whether you see a ghost or not, or whether something unexplained happens, that's what I'm in it for. And that's why I try to bring my audience now with my podcast and with my books.
Right, exactly. And and you know what? I totally agree with you because once upon a time, like I understand, but you know, when I did paranormal investigations, which is, you know, I've done it all through the years, but originally there wasn't that much of the equipment stuff. It was more interviewing participants. What did you see? What did you experience? You know, triggering events. What's the history if you know it, or, you know, you find out. It wasn't that much into the equipment or the, how can I say, the proof, you know, I got to produce proof kind of thing.
And the proof is born out of connection and out of the internet. And it makes sense because in one sense, there's a lot of people who want to become known because of it.
Sure.
Right. And so you put that to the side. There's even just when you've experienced something, and I've actually probably had more experience as a legend tripper than I've had as an investigator.
Sure. Yes.
You want someone to feel what you felt in that moment. And it was just you and maybe someone else that you go out with. and you guys can look at each other and you know it, right? Like, you know,
Oh my God, yes. I
and
know
no one
exactly
else
what you
can
mean.
understand it. And you say it to someone, and they look at you as like, yeah, and you're like, you're missing the point. There's no way for me to communicate the moment to you.
Right.
So, but for me, it's life changing. You know what I'm saying? But there's no way necessarily I can get you to understand what it's like to,
You know what
to
it
do
is? Like, the human body is the best instrument.
It is.
And I've been in enough where there's been equipment after a while, because I would work with different teams, because I was part of a research foundation where I would feel things, after you attenuate your body, like, how when you feel certain things in your body, where I would feel something, I'd be like, oh, and then bring
Yeah.
10, 15 seconds later, you feel an equipment, something goes off.
Right.
But you felt it in your body. That's what I'm saying, the human body. Now, the problem with that is that I can't reproduce it for you in a lab. You can't measure it. You can't photograph it. So, of course, but the human body is one of the best indicators sometimes, not all the time, sometimes, of when you're in the presence of some supernatural agent. Okay. But
and
again,
I think the other part of that is true as well, is that in almost all of the legend trips where something has happened,
yes.
You know very clearly when it's over. And sometimes you could have traveled 5 hours and waited 3 hours, and it takes 5 minutes. And when it starts, it starts, and when it ends, it ends. And you just look at each other and go, I guess we're going home now. Like, it's like,
or what, the other way around, you could spend 2 or 3 hours or a couple of hours, and you're like, oh boy, this is, there's nothing happening here. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you go, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
What? You feel.
Especially when you're dealing with, as an investigator, back in my investigator days, I always said the most activity happens during the setup and during the shutdown.
Oh, you too, huh?
Yeah. So if you don't, the very first thing you do is when you get to a location. This is like I said, the investigator days. When you go to a location, you start a camera running, and you don't finish that camera running until you leave.
Yes.
And so we do. I've kept that theory along with a lot of these legend trips, because we are the stand-ins for anybody who can't get out to this place and experience it. And so we're not concerned with catching things on camera. We're concerned with providing you with the moment. But it's to me, it was investigating 101, man. You start that camera because it always happens there, and it always happens.
It's like after you close every. And the truth was that a lot of the groups I worked with, they're the ones that were heavy into the equipment. Once we started doing stuff with equipment, so they'd be like, putting stuff away, because, you get to the point when you're ready to leave that everybody's like, all right, let's put all this stuff away, quick, right, like whatever. And I'd be like, and every once in a while I'd be like, oh man, all they're waiting for is just for that last lid to be closed on whatever, or that last camera or that last electrical, whatever, to be put away. And I tell everybody, normally, because nobody, if it was a residential kind of investigation, it would be a bad taste to stand out in front of somebody's house and, kind of do our own like mini meeting before everybody went their own way.
Yeah.
And so we would usually say, hey, there's a gas station down at the corner, or a Burger King, or let's pull in there a minute. Let's just talk real quick. And then everybody goes on their way. Usually a parking lot
of a Chinese food restaurant.
Someplace where, and we had a couple of experiences, believe it or not, when we would stop at some of these places of hearing things, and it would be like, we'd all look at each other. Of course, everything's put away. There's no camera. There's no nothing. Everybody's just standing there like, hey, how'd you feel? Whatever, like a debriefing. And then, of course, everybody goes home, because by then everybody's toast. You're tired or whatever. And we had a couple of situations, a couple of times where things happened, like, as far as, how everybody asks you, oh, do stuff follow you home?
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, that's when I learned one of the first times that I started carrying my smudge stick with me, and I'd smudge the everlasting, out of my car, and everybody sometimes look at me and go, what are you doing? It's like, nah, whatever. Okay. So
that's funny. So probably if I'm known for one thing over anything else, I'm known as the Pukwudgie guy. And if we want to get into that, that's, if we want to be here till midnight, we can touch upon Pukwudgie. But I was doing I was writing one of my books, Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting. Horrible title of the book, but there you go. And so there was a DVD attached to it. And so what I did was I hit the road because, like you, I'm an independent contractor. Like I never belong to a group. I don't believe in groups actually.
Right.
And so I brought out a really tech group, and I thought I liked the group because it was really tech.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had a trans medium, and I'd worked with them before. And I know that, she was pretty spectacular. Things would happen, real or not real. At least it was visual, and it was a visual thing. I was filming, for this DVD. And so I brought them into something I know you want to talk about tonight, the Freetown State Forest.
Yes.
And we're at the site of this place known as the Assonet Ledge. And we were, they were doing their thing, and they were one of the first groups that I know of that had really, really jacked up thermal imaging, because one of their members was a fireman. So he had that, like, the industrial fireman thermal imaging. And so yet they're also going with what this trans medium is feeling. Right. And so we were finished. We were getting ready to leave. And at this place, the Assonet Ledge, literally packing up. Everyone is closed up. And I got that feeling that we were talking about earlier. And I say to the trans medium, well, I say just out loud, I'm like, something is different. Something's changed. And then I look at the trans medium, I'm like, you know what I'm talking about. And I don't even get the sentence out. And her eyes roll in the back of her head.
There you go.
And now it's just me and her looking like something from The Exorcist. And I got to run. Get back with the camera. Get back with the camera. And it's probably the most popular or famous footage that I've ever shot. It's a YouTube video called When Pukwudgies Attack.
Okay.
I wish all of my stuff got as much traction as this one video. And it basically shows her being taken over by something, and then us trying to take her out, sedate her.
What was it?
Who's to say?
Oh no! So you never really?
Oh no! Like, the video's called When Pukwudgies Attack. Okay. Because we were Pukwudgie hunting at the time. And it's an area that is known for these little troll monster type creatures. Like, they're spotted there, but there's also UFOs that are spotted at that same location. There's also a ton of ghost lights that are seen there, which could be UFOs or spirits. So we never really knew. And of course, when you watch it, it's so dramatic that it looks fake. So
what did she think it was? Or what's her feedback when she came?
She said a Pukwudgie. She said a Pukwudgie.
So it was non-human. So basically, she's saying it was a non-human entity.
Yeah. And and in that vein, the Pukwudgies are known to control the spirits of the Wampanoag, the Native American tribe in that area, who they've taken the life of. Right. So these Pukwudgies were kind of trickster, like trolls, fairies of the forest, or however, they're really hard to classify. Okay. But they got to a point where they became very malicious, and they would attack people, and they would burn villages and kidnap babies and kill people. And so if they killed a Wampanoag or anybody, they would get almost like possession of their soul. And these souls manifest themselves in what they call Taipaiwunkas, what Wampanoags call Taipaiwunkas, which we would call orbs or ghost lights or will-o-the-wisp. And the part that you can't see in the video, mainly because it was edited out, because there's a group partying on the top of the ledge, and we're at the bottom of the ledge. They start swearing down to us. We start swearing up to them.
You should have left that.
So that footage exists, but it's not part of the video, right? So we go the other way, like, it's shot like this on her, but then it leans out towards the forest. And this is, it's fairly deep in the woods. It's not regularly visited. It wasn't visited at that time. Like, there's no cars, but you see these ghost lights in the woods, these orbs that are in the woods. And so it kind of reconfirms or reaffirms the idea that maybe this was a Pukwudgie. Or it was just all in her mind. Like, who knows? I know it's not for me to say what evidence is good or not. I present it. I try to create the setting of it to be like, here's what the situation was. All I can say is whatever it is, it's not fate. It's not doctored in any way.
Well, when you tell that, it sounds very much like, the Celtic beliefs, and fairies and fairy
Mhm.
folk, and
Yeah.
how usually you get the short end of the stick, and they're kind of malicious, and in some cases dangerous. If let's take Tinkerbell version out of this. If you look at the
Right.
stories told about fairies, they're a problem. Let me
They were Wampanoag lore was buried for a very long time until they
uh-huh.
kind of dug it up because people were having experiences and asking me as if I was some kind of authority what was going on, what they were
Okay.
experiencing. And so I kind of dug up these old stories. And if you were to ask me, looking at it critically, these are
Right.
Wampanoag stories heavily influenced and Christianized
Okay.
by settlers who had a deep history of the kind of fairy lore you're talking about.
Okay.
So I'm sure because the Wampanoag had no written language until they were Christianized, that I'm sure a little European leprechaun lore got
Sure.
mixed in with these Pukwudgies as they made their way from the mouth to the page.
Of course, and that happens. People don't
Yeah,
realize that
yeah,
culture, that oral tradition. That thing lost in translation, but it's like
exactly.
changed in
Yeah,
translation, and
yeah,
then
exactly,
eventually you
exactly.
get the version over here. Now, let me ask you before I do the intro: Is where you were at? Is that the same area that we're going to talk about? That forest,
Yeah, oh yeah,
that
yeah,
triangle?
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Now let
That's the
me do the
same
intro,
forest.
guys. Before we rolled, I mentioned to him because we're talking. I'm telling you, coincidences, they're incredible. Earlier today.
We call it hashtag follow the signs.
There you go.
There you go.
I'm watching TV and I'm like, of course, because it's Halloween, they've got all the Grizzly and all the horror movies. But anyway, I'm like, but some of these things after a while, it's like, oh, when you see the title, it's like, I wonder what that's about. It's like, all right, I already know what this is about. It's like,
Yeah.
so anyway, I come across this documentary, and basically it's retelling about cult slaying. That's how they allude to it in the title. It's cult slayings that turnout were in the town of Fall River, as in, the famous 40 whacks she gave her father 40 whacks,
Lizzie Borden.
Lizzie Borden, everybody thinks. But then it goes into that there was these murders, I want to say it was in the 1980s in Falls River. And I'm telling him, hey, I just saw this because he's telling me he's from that area. And then, drum roll, it turns out he knows all about this, and we were discussing what was presented on the documentary versus the reality of it. And I understand what that. Sometimes I've seen documentaries based out of South Florida, Miami, that I'm looking at. I'm like, that's not accurate. So when you
Yeah.
live in an area, when they present certain things that it's like either you're adding or if not, you're omitting. How's that? I'll be nice about it. Instead of outright lying, you're just omitting.
You're slanting it to your agenda
Right.
because ultimately, and really, they didn't overly need to do that because
No.
there's not much out there about Carl Drew and about the cult killings of that
Right.
time.
And let's put the setting here, Chris. Basically, this story is about at the beginning, the characters, they're all, unfortunately, they all come from broken homes. They grew up and they're all either prostitution, drug use, you name it.
Yeah.
The underworld, the underbelly. And at the beginning, they present to you that there's a series of murders that were looked at as having a satanic or occult, I don't know, influence, if you want to
Angle
call it
to
that.
them. Yeah, yeah.
And then go on with it, Chris, because what happens is, by the way, not everybody, most of the people that were involved are still alive. Others have deceased, but
Yeah, I mean it's not, so my beginning with this was
okay.
I used to work at a library and
Mm-hmm.
Suffolk University Law Library, and I had a great boss in terms of he loved ghosts and he would just be like, "Hey, go research this instead of working today," because
You're
he
like,
wanted to know about it, right?
yeah, what a great
And,
boss.
and so yeah, exactly, the best kind of boss because I had unlimited resources at my I could get anything. And so he says to me one day, he walks in and he's got his cup of coffee. He doesn't have a Robert the Doll mug, but he comes out and he's got his coffee. And he says to me, hey, have you ever heard of Freetown? And I said, you mean like South Africa, or West Africa, Freetown? Like, I know that very well. And he's like, no, in Massachusetts, up there, up in the Portuguese part. which was how he described it. And I'm like, never heard of it. And he's like, yeah, why don't you take some time and look into it and look into this satanic cop. And that was his information. He walked away, and that's all he had. And what I did was I started to kind of uncover what is the Freetown State Forest. And just for perspective, when the Freetown purchase happened, it included all of what is now Freetown, but also Fall River and also Tiverton, Rhode Island. So, people, and they're all part of a bigger thing known as the Bridgewater Triangle, which is just this area of Massachusetts where anything you can possibly imagine within the paranormal and supernatural happen.
Right. UFOs and everything, right?
Everything. And it's really popular now. There's a really bad, if you're talking about like getting the story wrong, there's a really bad podcast, like radio podcast out there by the guy from Supernatural, the guy who does the radio show Lore, Aaron Menke, called Bridgewater. And it's absolutely, if you've literally my research just vomited up and changed around. It's horrible.
Like, right. It's like,
yeah. But whatever, people like it. It's more popular than my show. So what can I say? And so I immediately got a line on this guy named Alan Alves. And Alan Alves was a cop. He was just a regular old cop that caught a few cases early that had a cult with a C, not with an O, a cult slant to them, because the Freetown State Forest was filled with different cults that were running through that originally he thought were just remnants of the hippies, which ended up being, much more organized and things like that. So he's I don't know what town in the Ocala that you live near.
I'm north of Ocala. I live like in a little itty bitty town with 5,000 people.
Beautiful. So imagine your town and imagine investigating over 30 homicides in like a 20-year detective career. And now you have Alan Alves. The Freetown State Forest was, I called it the paranormal dumping ground. You're less than an hour, much like the Ocala. You're an hour away from Boston, Providence, Rhode Island, Brockton, Massachusetts. These areas, Fall River and New Bedford, areas of high crime. You do your crime there. You dump the body in Freetown.
Right. I was going to say it's a dumping ground. You're right. Yeah.
Exactly. In an hour, you're in the middle of nowhere. But there was also these other crimes that were happening that were being drawn there. And so one of the very first cases that I found out about was the satanic murders, which we all called the Carl Drew murders. Carl Drew is the central figure of the story in the old days.
Right. He's like, he was like, I want to say he was described as this real cutthroat pimp guy, and I think that's why everything was laid at his feet.
And for all intents and purposes, like it really was. And if you've watched the documentary you're talking about, I think it's called Fall River, right? If you watch it, it's misrepresenting a little bit what was going on. He was kind of a little bit of a brain, but more the brawn. He had a younger woman whose name was Robin Murphy, who really kind of was the brains of everything. Now, we were talking about the satanic panic and all this stuff. They were 100% worshipers of Satan, right? Okay. And both of them used Satan as a way to entice people in and then to control them.
Sure.
So if you're talking about the satanic panic, you've got to separate the idea of that people were like molesting kids and stuff like that with people who were during that time who were into the occult, now with an OC, into the occult, who were using it as motivation, right? Sure. So the satanic panic is something real, right? These cases of lost memories that were like inserted into them, that's all real. But those killings, those slayings, were not motivated by Satan, not motivated by their Satanism. They were motivated by crime. They were motivated by, you don't talk about what's going on, and then we need to silence this person, and we need to silence this person. So it really was a case of, a pimp and his underling keeping control of their women and of their criminal enterprise.
Right. And that the flavor that you get of it is like, because of the occult that they've introduced, they have like supernatural knowledge. I know everything you're going to do before you do it. So it was a big psyop as well, convenience wise, you know.
Right. And of course, you're dealing with people who are high 100% of the time.
Yeah.
And so and you also have to keep in mind that a lot of these people are coming from either Fall River, New Bedford area in Massachusetts, or have directly come from Portugal, or the island I can't think of that's right off the coast of Africa, which is also highly Portuguese influenced. There's a version of Portuguese voodoo and Santeria that is very prominent in that part of Massachusetts.
I did not know
to the
that.
point that the Freetown State Forest is known for its zombies, right? Like so
Really?
if that's part of your cultural background and that's here, and you're high, you know what I'm saying, and you're smoking crack, and meth is now being introduced, like in the early, in the later stages of it, and you have that paranoia. Someone who seems to know everything about Satan and has these rituals can take that power.
Sure.
But I don't think in any of the cases, any of the murders that are involved in there, and any of the other murders that are unsolved but somewhat connected, that aren't necessarily part of the documentary, Carl Drew had very little to do, if anything, to do with them. And I present that in my book. And Carl Drew was so happy about that he sent me a few letters, and drew me some really creepy pictures.
See, this is the thing. And how can it's almost like when you finish seeing it, they kind of put that doubt in your mind. Was this the guy that was responsible for the murder of two of the prostitutes that we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
But by the same token, it's like, and I agree, but that he was a creepy, he was an SOB. This is like no nice guy that was railroaded.
He's not Manson, he's not Dahmer, he's not Gacy.
No,
he is your typical street thug who ran his corner of town, his little section of town, which is like a block. You know what I'm saying? And gets caught up in this bigger thing, which then becomes, once it hits the public, and they get like, oh, so not only are they having these satanic rituals with police officers in an apartment building, but they're also going into the Freetown State Forest to have them at this shack, the infamous shack in the Freetown State Forest. Now it explodes to become something bigger, and he becomes, to some degree, a boogeyman and a folk hero in Massachusetts, when really he's just a pimp who got caught up in what is happening in every town like that all across the...
Even says that he was at that time. Well, I don't know, but I don't think that he was illiterate. I don't know if he's still illiterate, but that even during those times, because he grew up in a very dysfunctional household, and he didn't get any schooling, so he was like illiterate. And like you said, basically, it's like you do. The guy was not a nice guy by no means, but at the same time, is like, and in the process, there's people here that this happened when they were really young, like in their late teens or 20s, and now some of them, if they're alive, they're still older. Some of them changed their story, and then
I think really only two of those people, like Robin Murphy. And I remember right about the time Dark Woods was coming out, Robin Murphy was let out. So they talk about in the documentary, she's let out for a while, and then she breaks her parole, and she has to end up going back in. And it was like, people were like, dude, is Robin Murphy going to come to your house? And like,
Well, let me ask you something real quick about that, because I didn't understand that. And let's put this, Robin Murphy she was what, 17 or 18?
Yeah, she was really
teenager.
Young.
She's young. Again, she comes from this really dysfunctional background, you name it. But they're interviewing all these different police officers that that time were active, and all of them across the board were saying she was tougher than a lot of men they knew. They said there were men that ran from this girl, and she's 17. Yeah. She was ultra violent,
and she also had a genius IQ. So
I didn't know that part.
Oh yeah,
well, you can tell she's not stupid at all. No, you could tell
exactly. That was and not only did she have a genius IQ, she had, because of that horrible background, a deep understanding of people and how to manipulate them.
Well, she was. When you listen to the story, you realize at some point this girl or this woman decides, I'm not going to be the victim. I'm going to be the victimizer. Yeah. Enough of that.
Yeah.
And she turns into a super predator if you want to call it driven by circumstance, whatever you like. According to one of her stories, one of the people there that they also cast as a Satanist was molesting her since she was 11 or 12 years old. But anyway, but they were saying that basically she's competing as a pimp against the other guy, like you said. They're doing the same thing, but they're both wanting the same turf.
I think in the documentary, I saw the documentary when it came out, so I was literally waiting for the next episode to come out of it when it seemed like a miniseries. So it's got to be like 2-3 years ago now.
Yes,
but I think it's painted in there as if they were competitors.
Right. Well, is that accurate?
They weren't competitors. No, it was more of they were working together. They were running in the same circles. Okay. If they were competitors at all, they were competitors in that, she was at that time portrayed. The big dog walking and the little dog hopping.
Yeah.
Yeah, butch.
Yeah, exactly. I remember that.
That would be maybe more of like the relationship. But with him out of the way, she was the one. She would have been the one to be able to take control and
right. It was almost like they portrayed almost like they're trying to do the same thing. They're competitors, but at the same time, it's like don't stumble because if you do, I'm going to be the first one. To take advantage of it.
It was much more they were running in the same circles and working at the same things, and she was the newcomer and he was the at whatever 21, 22 years old, the grizzled veteran of that area. But so it it's
let me ask you something.
She turns on him.
Right. So she's that lady, she's like, man, no mercy, no prisoners. Forget it.
And he looks sketchy. Like you just look at him. And he's right out of central casting for an evil person, and she is evil on the inside more, and outwardly although I think 20 years later from it, she looks like one of the Manson girls to me in all.
Well, God, you must have. They do point that out. They said that by the time she came to court, and we'll talk a minute about the murders, they, of course, had put her up, back in the 70s and 80s, she had like a sweater with a thing, and they even put a little cross on her, and they put like her hair, long and straight hair. Exactly like what you described, like some of these Manson girls.
Yeah.
But, I mean, very schoolgirlish, like, you look at her and you go, how could she be running?
She was the spitting image of like Karen Carpenter.
That's the way they presented her.
And the newspapers every once in a while would get a picture. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie like The Devil's Advocate, where the woman every once in a while she would see the demon face and then it would go back. They would get one shot of her, like those great pictures of Ted Bundy too, and you would just see the eyes. And it would just be like
when the mask slips a little bit.
Yeah, and the mask slips down a little bit, and you would see it. But she was, and so she got the lesser term and was able to get out after a while. So.
Now, this is the thing. Let's talk about, there's one murder of a prostitute. Again, by the way, these prostitutes were very young, 17, 18, 16. These were young girls. There's one of them that they find under some bleachers. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is pretty horrific.
That's probably the most folklore aspect of the crime altogether.
What do you mean by that?
Because she's found with her body dumped.
Yes.
People, and I've had people call me on radio shows when I've been talking about this back in the day up there in the Triangle, talking about, hey, is that the person who they found her with a head on a pike? Or that her body was dumped in a church and the head was dumped in a synagogue? Hey, isn't that the one where they went out and they found the Satanist playing soccer with her head? Like all these different things. And there are, by the way, all those things I just mentioned are evil satanic crimes that happened in that area.
Okay.
But it's one of those things where, and I think it's the one with the M, Madison. This is the first book I ever wrote.
In other words, what you're saying is all these stories, after a while, they start bleeding over one into the other.
Into each other, right? So, there was a case where in the Freetown State Forest, there was a mausoleum that was broken into. The heads were taken out of the mausoleum, and the teenagers who were looking to get into like one of the bigger cults that was active in that area had done this to drink out of the skulls with the idea that you get power if you drink out of the skull of the dead. So that's a story, and that's something that really happened. And yet Kathleen Marston, I believe is her name,
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes she's the head in that case. And so any weird thing that has
Right. They kind of
happened,
like hodgepodge it together. But let me tell you something. This is
sometimes,
the thing. The how can I say it? The way they describe the murder, though, it was not somebody that they like. You know how you hear about these murders, execution style. They shoot somebody in the back of the head. Boop. That's it.
yeah.
This was a pretty horrific. They
So,
tortured this person in a way. This girl.
so what happened in terms of the Freetown altogether for me is
Right.
that you read a case like that, and then you read a case of the high school cheerleader who was hung up and left to die, and then you read about the serial killers, which had a satanic angle to them, and you're
Right.
reading about these drug dealers who set people on fire, and what I noticed was that in this paranormal dumping ground, in this dumping ground,
Okay.
everything was jacked up, everything was intensified. It
Right.
was like the crimes were disproportionate, or the violence was disproportionate to the crimes. And so it was almost as if these people were, to use an easy term, it was almost like they were possessed. If you look at Lizzie Borden, it's almost as if she were possessed. And let's keep in mind that she's not the first murder on that property as well, right? So, and that was also a case where the people seemed to be out of their mind. And so I started to like roll around in my head the question of, can someplace be evil?
Okay.
But then also, can the same energy, the same juice, the same bad juju, in addition to causing ghosts, Bigfoot, Thunderbirds, zombies, all these paranormal things, can it also draw in serial killers? Can it also draw in uber violence? Can it also that the triangle itself and Freetown to an even higher degree in Massachusetts had at that time the highest divorce rate, the highest rate of teen suicide. The Bridgewater State Hospital had like 7 times the amount of suicides that would happen in that mental health facility than any mental health facility.
Wow.
24, which is the backbone of the Bridgewater Triangle, had more fatal accidents per car accidents than anywhere else in the country.
Right. Like the odds are like out of proportion.
Right. And so it began with that question of like, are some places bad? And do they draw bad things into them? Like, are things drawn there?
Yes.
Does it not only taint stuff, but also beg this dark stuff to come in? Sure. And so that first book, Dark Woods, which talks about all of those cases, it talks about the serial killers, it talks about the James Cater murder, which I think has a satanic angle as well.
What's the name again? James who?
I believe it's James Cater. Kater. He was a man who had kidnapped a woman out of a town and brought her to the Triangle.
Okay.
And brought her to the Freetown State Forest, hung her up to a tree, and left her for dead. And she died of exposure.
Oh.
From reading everything, it's not. It wasn't exposure. It was probably a bullet wound. He had done almost the same exact crime in Essex County, Massachusetts, had served time for it, except for the girl got away. I was able to track remnants of a cult that began in Essex County. So think Salem, right? Salem, Mass. Right. Essex County, as they leave Essex County and they move to the New Bedford Fall River area, then all of a sudden this guy who seems to kind of be working for them shows up in the Freetown State Forest where this cult is now active. The day that he was caught, someone mysteriously burned his house down, and any evidence that was in his house of anything.
What a coinkydink, huh?
Now, you and I were talking right before we started about, they want this cult angle because it then can connect things and stuff like that. The Cater case is the exact opposite. I talked to Alan Alves, who knows everything about it. I mean, this is a guy who was a consultant to police forces all across the country because of how much of this kind of stuff was happening in his town. And him and every single law enforcement officer I talked to in writing the book very quickly would go, nope, no occult with that, no occult with that, like no Satanism with that, nope. Because the opposite is true. Once you get that involved, now it's sometimes harder to convict people.
Well,
because
this is
now
the thing, and I'm going to mention, and you know, it's
yeah,
one of the, I've always had books all my life, and this is, you know, one of those books that somehow you lose in the shuffle. And
uh-huh,
this was a book, I want to say, was either published in the 80s or the 90s, and it was written by, again, I can't remember. It's one of those things that without, and the guy, if I remember correctly, he was ex law enforcement, and in
yeah,
it, he starts talking about historically how sometimes at crime scenes there's occult symbology,
yeah,
but not blatant. How's this?
exactly, yeah,
And that when law enforcement arrives, they don't realize what they're looking at. That sometimes there's messaging for, you know, if you have eyes to see about, and I guess my point is that sometimes, yeah, you have the cult or the satanic or whatever you want to call it, you know, symbology. And like you said, it's used a lot as a big psyop to scare whoever's in there or just to draw in people, whatever. But then when you do have the people that are really into it, that sometimes they do that killing, whether it's sacrificial, and they leave symbology that if you don't know what you're looking at,
right,
it just goes right past you. And police, law enforcement will look at it as just a regular murder, whatever.
right.
And I think that happens a lot. People don't realize that not every occult
If
type of murder
if you know what you
has
if
to
you
be
know
in your face.
if you know what you're doing, so one of the greatest things Alan Allen's taught me, and I used it when I started looking at the Ocala as well, is
Okay.
the idea of if you see the cult, you're not seeing the real cult
Right.
because there are different levels of
Yes.
organization. And the really, now I'm not willing to say like Illuminati and stuff like that level.
Right.
We're
Yeah.
talking about organized crime that have an occult angle to them. The people who are working for them don't know that they're working for them. If
Right.
that
Are
makes sense,
you
they think they're doing their own thing, and yet
right?
they're
That sometimes it depends, you know, what cog in the, where are you in the cog of the wheel or whatever. Are you
right.
familiar at all with Maury Terry, who wrote the Son of Sam's book?
Yeah.
If you look, you know, besides detailing the Son of Sam and Berkowitz, basically, you know, the theme of his book is that it was, to him, it was like a cult. In other words, it was a group of people, whether they were cultists, Satanists, or whatever, that were involved in it. And it's exactly what you described. Some of these people were just basically, they were being sent out to kill people for
Right.
whatever, if they
For
need to
whatever.
get rid of somebody.
Exactly. And it's funny because if you've watched the newer documentary on Netflix,
I
they
haven't watched it yet.
they basically tear that entire book apart.
I know.
I'm not sure if they. I'm not sure it was the cult called the Order or something like that.
No, well, the in some cases they call them the children, and they look at it when he details it,
Yeah,
which I have to give him his man. That guy really, like,
yeah.
when he says something, he gives you why but they're usually, they look at it as being sprung from the Process Church out of the UK.
The process is what I'm thinking of, right?
Okay,
So
which has its roots, believe it or not, in L. Ron Hubbard Scientology, early Scientology. This is
yeah.
back in the 60s,
So
and then of course it goes off and does his own thing, kind of deal.
so if you're running this kind of cult, and so we talked about the Satanic Panic, but guess what? There are nefarious groups out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people say like, oh, we had to have caught them because we saw an order for pizza, and we know pizza was code for something else.
Right.
People that high up are never going to get caught because
Oh no.
unless they want some aspect of it caught. So if I'm running a cult of that degree, I say, Marlene, you are now a police officer. So go infiltrate them. And you, Joe, you are going to infiltrate the biker gangs.
And that's exactly how they do it. I am so glad you pointed that out.
You are going, wait. You are going, everybody, you're going to go infiltrate the NAACP, and you're going to infiltrate the KKK,
Yes.
and you're going to, and it's one of those things where no one knows, and they're never, the important thing is they're never the leaders. They're always the lieutenants who are not seen because they're there to influence the policies, but not throw them out there. And so all these things which seem diametrically opposed to each other are all built upon the same thing, which is profit and chaos.
Right. Well, this is the thing. And if you read the book, and a lot of it, it describes exactly, like, maybe you might know who's right above you, but up the food chain, you really don't know. And there's one part, and where Berkowitz describes how they were trying to get him a job at what's the equivalent of dog catcher, as an animal control guy.
Right.
You think, what for? Because they wanted to sacrifice dogs, German
Yeah.
shepherds to be precise. And you might think, wow, but how much easier would it be to be the guy that works at the animal control?
Right. And have
So
access to all of that.
Right. So,
Right.
hey, when we get a dog that fits our needs, you're going to call so-and-so and say, hey, guess what we got in here?
Right.
Come and adopt it or whatever. But they do that at different echelons. Not everybody was infiltrated to be, the dog catcher, but it's that kind of idea.
It's one of those things where you sound crazy when you say it.
Yeah.
And maybe it's conspiracy theory, and maybe it's just your mind making. But as soon as I started doing research on the Ocala and just being aware, all of a sudden you start to hear that word in every news report.
Right.
You start to hear the Ocala National Forest associated with multiple, sometimes daily, disappearances.
Well, are you familiar with Gerard Schaefer? He was a serial killer out here in the 70s and 80s.
Dude, like, you are talking to, my obsession is Gerard Schaefer.
Okay. Well, that two of his, how's this? You can't convict somebody posthumously, but 2 cold cases, they retired based on the fact that they think he was the one. The girls have never been found.
No,
that's it. Their bodies have never been recovered. And I want to say, not too long ago,
still very active.
Huh?
Their ghosts are still very active.
Oh, we got to talk
exactly
about that.
What you're talking about.
Okay. This is the thing. Now listen to this. This is how I found out about how like different roads lead to Rome. I had an author that I met. I was doing a Comic-Con, and he was a writer of all these different. Oh, I see that. Okay.
We're going to put that
up in just hold on a minute. He's talking to me. Oh, boy, Marlene, here we go. To stream, there we go.
Is that who you're talking about?
Yes, these two girls. They've never been found, by the way.
Yeah.
Never been found. They disappeared out of Ocala National Forest. Their boyfriends, they had to accompany their boyfriends who were diving, and these 2 girls, by the way, in the middle of the day, are walking along the path. They're like, what would you do if your boyfriends are diving? You're there. And later on, I believe somebody says that they see a guy walking behind them along one of the trails or the paths. But hey, it's a national forest. What do you expect? That's it.
Right.
Never seen again. No, so far, no bodies have ever been recovered. No remains.
Yeah, I know where they're buried.
Okay.
So
wait. Oh my God! See, don't do that to me. Wait, let me see how I'm going to do this tie into Schaefer.
Okay.
I talked to this guy, and he's telling me about how there's this deviltry out in St. Lucie County. Yeah. All right. And we started talking. We even went out there. He starts telling me how he bases fictional stories around the tree, and that is supposed. Then he comes to tell me that after he publishes this fiction book, you get inspired by true events. He starts getting hassled by Satanists.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm like, oh, come on. And he's like, no. He goes, I did. I have been. And I was like, what? And then it's like, okay, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Did this guy, he dumped women in different areas. It wasn't just specifically there. Did he go there?
As a matter of fact, other than another case that I have, 2 cases I should say that I think that he's good for. One for sure. He pretty much was a Martin County, because he was a Martin County deputy.
Yes.
He's pretty much that side. Although he did do some work in St. Pete as well, so it's really hard to nail that stuff down. I've been to the Devil's Tree.
Okay.
I have Schaefer's voice on tape.
Really?
Which is really creepy. Yeah, I have a project called Boogeyman, which is the fact and fiction of Gerard Schaefer. So I don't know if you knew this about me, but like, I've been researching Gerard Schaefer for the last 2 years, like hard.
No. I didn't. Let me tell you something. Let's face it, Florida. You know how some states, all the weirdos somehow end up in Florida. And it's one of those things, and it was like one of those things where you meet somebody, he's telling me about the inspiration for his fictional books, and the next thing you know,
oh wait, I don't have the slide in this one. Okay, sorry. I
you
have the
come
slide
up
in another
on
one.
Gerard Schaefer.
Yeah.
And then you start, and back then, when this happened, I was living down in Miami. I had no idea I was going to end up living close to Ocala. And then I followed up after the initial, and I find out that finally they closed the case, the cold case on these two girls.
Yeah. And they
Almost
recently closed another case just a few months ago of a little girl he abducted as well. So yeah, so these two ladies are they're in Alexander Springs.
right.
So they're in Altoona with their boyfriends. They don't know each other. The four, like, their couples know each other, obviously, but they don't know each other. But they're all part of this group called, one of my favorite names of all time of a group. They're the Aquaholics.
That's cute.
Because they all like to skin dive, right?
Okay.
So they get to Alexander Springs. It's too cold.
Okay.
The girls stay at the table, at a picnic table. The boys go off. Now, to me, this is never explained in the story, but to me, when I hear the two boys go off and leave their girlfriends, to me, it sounds like they went in the woods to get high, like to smoke some weed or something like that.
Right.
They come back, the girls are not seen ever again. So Gerard Schaefer, basically, in a nutshell, Gerard Schaefer picks up these two girls as a cop. He picks up these two girls who are hitchhiking.
Right. People don't realize that in the 70s, hitchhiking was a big thing.
Right. And so he picks them up, and then he invites them out the next day. And when he invites them out the next day, he hangs them from a tree, and he essentially is going to murder them when he's called off on cop duty and leaves. And
right, but it's not these girls.
What did you say? Not these girls, different girls.
Right. These are two different girls. Yeah.
This is like 3 or 4 years after this.
Right.
And so he immediately tells, and they escape. The two girls escape. He immediately tells his commanding officer, like, I was trying to teach these girls not to hitchhike. I was trying to teach them a lesson. But he gets brought in, and he essentially starts serving time eventually for assault, for kidnapping and assault, right? For holding someone in.
Yeah, I think the police chief realizes that's a bunch of
right.
Yeah, I was like, yeah.
And so they, but it's still a minor charge. He's not like going away for years and years and years. But during that time, they connect him to an almost exact crime on Hutchinson Island,
right,
where the two women are killed.
Yes.
Then they raid his house, which is nowhere near Port St. Lucie.
Mm-hmm.
That's important because there's a broken down foundation right near the Devil's Tree that people sometimes say was his house where he tortured women, which is completely not true.
Right, but people have to understand also that you go now to that location and it's a residential area, but back then there was nothing out there.
Right. So, and when they when they go to his mom's house in Fort Lauderdale, they find trophies of dozens of cases.
Yes.
And so they found trophies from these two women whose bodies are eventually found in Port St. Lucie, in addition to the two women that you're seeing right there.
Right, because he does away with some of even his own neighbors. Okay.
Yeah. There were a few cases where he was doing that as well, and so he ends up anywhere between 6 and 130 murders. He's connected to one way or another. Now, the two ladies that you have that we have here, I'm struggling with their names. I always have my notes. If I could zoom in, I could totally see it's Nader and something else.
Right.
Lechner and Nader, I think their names are. Where I'm pretty sure they are is Schaefer's MO was to abduct from one place and bring to another. And
right. And like, in other words, someplace, if he was going to torture them, where they could be screaming and nobody was going to hear him. Exactly.
So it's my belief that he actually brought them to the woods that were off of Rolling Acres Road in Lady Lake.
Okay.
for one reason or another, and that's the other picture that you're seeing there in the left hand side of the, or right, depending on you look at the picture of the boat, is that they actually had reason to believe they were in Lady Lake, the lake at Lady Lake, and so they brought out Lake County investigators to try to find their bodies there. But I believe they were buried in the woods off of Rolling Acres Road, which is an extremely haunted section of that town.
Really?
That has one of the ghostly legends that's connected to it. In addition to this woman in white hitchhiker.
Well, let me ask you something. Do you think, because sometimes I'm trying to look, they were like, do you think, what was it, that he used a gun to like force them out? What do you think?
Wow, what was it? He was a talker, first of all.
Yeah.
And so, because many of his murders involve two people, right? Like two people. So how do you get control of two people?
Right. Well, he kind of boasted that once he was able to do twos, it was like twice as fun.
There's a story that when Ted Bundy makes his way to Stark Prison, which is in the Ocala, he makes his way to Stark Prison. One of the first things he does when he gets there is find a way to meet Gerard Schaefer and thank him for Ted Bundy thanking Gerard Schaefer for giving him the inspiration to kill two women at once.
Right, like double the.
So yeah, I don't know how he would. I don't even know what his position would have been then. I don't have my timeline with me. I have an intricate timeline in my bedroom of where he is during certain times, whether he was authoritative enough to be a park ranger or to have some kind of identification.
Well, see, this takes place. This was supposed, because remember, again, that's the thing about some of these serial killers. Sometimes they say they claim victims they never had, but sometimes their real number is kind of fuzzy. But I know this happened in 66. Okay.
66 for this one.
And this is like one of the early ones. And again, it's like in the middle of a park, that you think with two guys, but even though the guys are not there. And I always thought, did he like pull out a gun? But if you look at him, especially back in the 60s, he had that all-American look.
Yeah.
Like very like handsome and clean cut and everything.
He had, if you look at his history, even if you talk to like or listen to like Sandra London,
yes,
who co-authored his book with him, the book was essentially a record of his crimes. He had this really weird way of luring women in and being seductive.
Oh yeah,
and tapping into the BDSM that was inside of them that they didn't know was inside of them. Now, I'm not saying that's what happened in the park, but he had whether he just could read it or whether he brought out something that was in just a lot of these women naturally, that abuse, that connection between sex and violence, he did a really good job of getting a lot of women willingly in line with that, which, sometimes was able to satisfy his that side of him for times.
Well, this is the thing. You hear that.
Are we a kids show? Can we say BDSM on?
Oh my God! Yeah, whatever. Okay, but sometimes I get those mixed up myself. Yeah. What is there? Sadomasochistic or binding or whatever. Okay, don't worry about that. But it's like everything goes here. The thing was, early when he was a teenager, they interviewed his teenage girlfriend.
Yeah,
and she's saying how in the relationship, lucky for her, it ended. He wanted to play act like a rape. He wanted her to act like, I'm raping you, and he also had, I believe, also a fetish with wearing women's underwear and that kind of deal.
Yeah.
And then he kind of like got worse as he grew older.
It's really interesting because I would like to know if this woman is still alive and what she thinks. But he had an older woman when he was a little bit younger who trained him how to deliver pain, and that her kink was to be raped, and she trained and molded him to fill that fantasy for her. And
that's what, and you always think about what comes first, the chicken or the egg, because
I mean it's but then again he took so naturally to it that it was something
sure, like, oh, this is wonderful.
I don't know, It's really, but and that's the interesting thing about Gerard Schaefer, which is why it's been this focus of mine for so long, is that there's so much. First of all, there are so many sites of his murders that are connected to ghostly legends or haunted sites.
Right, because and this is the thing. He was like again, people have to remember that a lot of these locations that you look at them now, they're populated.
Yeah, but they weren't then. And Rolling Acres is a great example of that. But then there's just so much about him that is mythology and has been mythologized. And yet weirdly, no one would rank him in the top 10 of serial killers, right? As far as I know, he's only been mentioned once on Criminal Minds. And mentioned wrong, actually.
Right.
They say the opposite. They say Schaefer got the inspiration from Bundy to kill two people around. We're talking about a man who, because of his intelligence and because of his charm, basically was a jailhouse lawyer, which is what might have gotten him killed. He has his fingers. Otis Toole was a good friend of his, and Otis Toole is most likely the person who kidnapped and murdered Adam Walsh.
Right, exactly.
When they were in jail, once the elder Walsh founds America's Most Wanted and starts to become popular, Otis Toole started sending him ransom notes, saying, if you want your son's hand or if you want your son's head,
right, I remember.
Give me a certain amount of money. That was Gerard Schaefer who was writing those letters for Otis Toole because he was illiterate.
Well, this is the thing that, I believe he was like subpar a little bit on IQ, Otis Toole. He was like,
Yeah, like, yes. That's a very diplomatic way of saying
he was
illiterate and below the intelligence.
Right. It wasn't just that he was illiterate, because there's people that are illiterate, but they're real smart in the sense of
that was smart, but no.
No. And this is the thing. If you look at it, in reality, Gerard Schaefer predated Bundy, and he was already in jail. But from what I understand, that some people think that he might have gotten killed, which was what happened with Gerard Schaefer. He was killed by another inmate because he had developed a kind of a little bit of being a snitch. It was one of those guys where,
which is why part of the reason why he was able to offer detail. He was very dichotomous in that he would say. He would boast of these numbers, but then if someone would write, he would never say the word serial killer. He would always use the initials SK. If someone wrote a newspaper article or a book that mentioned him and used the word serial killer, he would immediately sue them, including
he was throwing those frivolous lawsuits around like frisbee.
So and he was good at it too.
What else he got to do?
He was worked, so he knew a lot of what was going on in the jail and other criminal enterprise that were going on outside of the jail, because he was acting as a lawyer for a lot of these people. My personal opinion is that it had something to do with that, just like you're saying, or it also might have had to do with. Do you know who Danny Rawlings is?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, the Gainesville Ripper. Yep. Also has a connection to Schaefer as well, because Sandra London was his fiancée when he was.
Well, see, this is, and I heard that after Sandra London dumped Schaefer, she was into her bad boys, and I mean bad boys.
Yeah.
That after she dumped him and went off with Rawlings, so she's trying to square a deal with a book. That then Schaefer comes after, threatening her. I'm going to do this to you. I don't know what he's going to do because he's incarcerated. But yeah.
And so there's a lot of smoke and mirrors with what Schaefer may have done, might have done. There's this one case where he's accused of kidnapping these two girls, and their bodies are never found. And I'm actually able to find evidence that not only are they not dead, they were never kidnapped.
Which one? Are these the ones from the beach at the ice cream truck when they were little?
These are the ones from the West Coast ones. What you just said describes like 5 of his kind crimes. So it's like not the one in St. Pete that he eventually gets kind of snagged on, but the other one that's on the other coast. And that girl, I'm able to track like her life. She ends up becoming it's a very big deal. She marries Florida's vampire, Florida's most famous vampire.
Yes, I know who you're talking
about. The
about.
ceremony on Halloween and stuff like. And you look at the pictures and you know it's the same girl like 20 years later or 30 years later. And it's that kind of stuff that follows him around everywhere. Like there's story after story about these weird things. And the framing of what I'm working on with it is that I think that he is the leading candidate for probably Florida's most popular and most covered, in a way, unsolved murder, which would be Little Miss Panosofsky.
You think so? You think so?
I think 100%. 100%. Everything about that. And the weird thing is that for those people who are listening who don't know anything about the case, every time the case is mentioned, everyone is obsessed with who she is.
Yes.
But in every documentary, the 2 unsolved mysteries they've done about, the countless documentaries, they never mention suspects. All the time is dedicated to this fascination because she is a roadmap of forensic psychology and our advances in it, right? As we've gotten better, we've gotten a better handle on who she is, but no one ever talks about who did it.
Okay, this is the thing. She's discovered, that there still is a Greek diaspora over on the west coast of Tarpon Springs, all that. Her dental work,
it's crazy, right?
Was found to have, it was done in Greece. In other words, she, how they try to figure out who's this person, obviously, but they don't have any type of, so, of course they look at dental work and they look at the type of dental work. And
they also look at, especially in her case, levels of isotopes, different types of
isotopes. Right, exactly. Like what was she eating?
I'm an English teacher. I don't know what I'm talking about, but I know it's isotopes. I know that word.
It's like, right. They're trying. Remember, this is, not like now that DNA and the genome and all that. This is prevalent. The only thing they got to go on is fingerprints, and if that person's never been fingerprinted, there goes that. Dental, and like you said, what did she eat? How long ago?
Right.
Et cetera, et cetera. And I remember that basically everything with her that they could look at went in a dead end. Okay, which was, looks like she wasn't really born or raised here in Florida. Not really.
Yeah, so they've recently, like in the past 5 years, they have isolated the town in Greece that she's from.
Okay.
They've spoken to people who essentially say this, a very particular person went to America, and around the time, if I'm doing my math, what is it, 1962? I know, or is it 72? Whatever it is, it's 62, I believe, or 60. We just came up on the anniversary of it last year.
Okay.
That she disappeared at that time, and so they think they know, or they might know, who she is. But based on all of that work that they were able to do, they basically found the town in Greece that she's from, and were able to connect with people who are talking about a missing girl who came to America, or missing woman, I should say, who came to America and matches all of the other things, like had the baby, had this certain surgery, all these other things that go along with it. They've shown them the composite. So the interesting thing for people who don't know the case is, as technology has developed over the years, it's been applied to the Miss Panosofsky case. And so you see, here's a portrait, here's a sketch, to we've used her bone structure to develop this digital image, to we now have a 3D image, to
right now I've seen those 3D images that are wow. They're like
yeah, so it really is. But in all of that, they never talk about who did it, who might have done it, who the suspects are, right?
Right.
And so she's found in the water in Lake Panosofsky, which is why she's got it right off 75. I drive it all the time, right by by on that bridge where the people saw her body floating right off that bridge all the time off 75. And I always go, little Miss Panosofsky, give her a little kiss, we'll find you, and we'll find your killer. And she was found with a belt around her neck, which is classic Schaefer, right? She's found, now granted, that's not a ridiculous MO. Like, that's not like, it's some weird, bizarre thing that not other people might do. But she's found in what is only whatever it is, it's only a little bit of time away from the cases we were just talking about with Lechner and Nader, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's in the same vicinity. He was known for St. Pete. So we're talking St. Pete's an hour away from
Yeah, no, that you could get there like a nothing. Yeah.
I mean, everything makes sense, and yet and he was active during that time. He was an active serial killer during that time, and yet not only is his name not brought up, no name is ever brought up. And it seemed like now I don't know if it's true or not true, but it's a really good framing because he's perfect for it. And it's another example of why Schaefer is this kind of boogeyman who really, for the last 40, 50 years, has terrorized the state even from the grave. And yet so many people don't know his name. So when you throw out Schaefer, just like you did at the beginning of this, and I'm like, yeah, I know Schaefer.
No, let me tell you something. This guy was like, he was really into, it wasn't just the serial killing as in killing. He was into the torture aspect.
Yeah, it was, and like I said, because of that, there's so much that fits into our fears. And so he is mythologized. He's this weird folk hero where all these different things around him, it's really hard to grasp onto. It's like trying to hold smoke because anything could be true and nothing could be true, and all of it would make complete sense in Schaefer world.
Well, and what you said as far as,
by the way, anyone in the audience, we haven't even started to talk about why we were going to talk tonight. Like,
I know that we're going to go back there. Don't worry about it.
Which is all just on the fly. Like, we had no idea this is what we were going to be talking about tonight,
but you know what? Like, and what you mentioned him about being like the gift of gab.
Yeah.
There was one of his neighbors that disappeared. I want to say she eventually was found. I can't remember, but she used to work as a barmaid, and she's telling her, I want to say her sister or sister-in-law, our neighbor, check this out. He works for the CIA and he wants to hire her, and pay her lots of money.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Right. In other words, he any other person is going to be like, really, come on. Yeah. But he kind of knows what to say to some of these women that to somebody else would be incredulous. Like, come on, who are you?
Is like he was multiple people, and so that's why so much about him could be true.
Right, but he knew how to feed into the person's, like,
he did. Yeah,
she'll believe this. She'll think, oh my God, I'll go with you wherever you want because we're gonna go do a James Bond film or James Bond lifestyle. I mean,
and if you look at some of these stories, some of the stories of abductions and near abductions that involve mothers saying, "That's amazing. Have a good time."
Yeah,
it's not just the women themselves.
Well, you know that's how he got caught. One of the times, one of the moms.
That's the one in St. Pete who she got the license plate slightly wrong
on his blue Datsun.
Yeah.
Thank God. It's something. I'm thinking to myself, if something's making you think, like, why don't you telling your daughter get off the car, get out of the car right now?
Why don't you do that part of it too? Yeah, so one of the stories that I found, and it was kind of an obscure line. And he says it to Sandra London, and he repeats it several other times. And this is a crazy part of him. What could scare the boogeyman, right? Mm-hmm. So he's in jail, and he's talking about several different criminal organizations.
Oh my God, I know. Let's see if you're going with this.
He has a part in them, right?
Okay.
And he's a high level member of this, and they love him, and he can do anything. He's basically telling Sandra London and anyone else, I can kill you anytime I want.
Right. Yeah.
And so he's boasting about this stuff, and your party, half of you is going like, yeah, okay, like not only you, a member of,
he was saying the Dixie Mafia. He was like,
right. The Dixie. See, you're a smart gal.
Thank you.
And so he has this one line, which is kind of a throwaway line, where he talks about how he has it in with this biker group that I'm not going to say the name. This biker group out of Daytona,
okay,
who are running drugs and who are a satanic cult posing as a biker group,
okay,
who are running things through the Ocala. That he can do that will do whatever he wants them to do.
Right.
He sends this to her. He almost immediately, within weeks, is shipped off inexplicably. Like I haven't been able to find any reason why he's transferred from Stark to a prison in Marion County. I don't think it's Coleman. They don't say what prison it is, but I don't think it's Coleman.
Yeah, there's a few out
he
here.
He spends only a few days.
Mm-hmm.
He goes back to Stark and he recants everything he said. This man never recanted anything in his life.
You're right. It was like, what are they going to do to me? Put me in jail?
Something put the fear of the devil, we'll say, in the boogeyman. Now, I'm working on the Ocala book, and I'm making it in my mind as I'm starting to work on it. It is Darkwoods 2, right? Okay. So it was going to be this combination of the same thing: the cults, the crime, and the paranormal of the Ocala.
Okay, we're gonna hold this this Ocala because I'm going to ask you something real quick. But okay. I'm going to ask you if you heard this as far as Schaefer.
Okay.
Then in one of his ramblings, because of course, whether he really had these connections or not, or he was just using them for whatever. One of the times, you remember, I don't know if you're aware that his dad, that he had a connection with child porn via his dad that was on the outside, and he got busted. And I mean, the cops were trying to use him as an informant, but at the same time, he's running his own child porn and posing as a woman, sending letters out. One of those deals. In one of these things, one of the detectives says that he's aware of child trafficking. Okay. And these people that would take and I'm thinking to myself, that what they do is that when they wanted to, they would take these kids. When I say kids, I'm not sure how old they are, but they're alluded to as children.
Yeah.
They put them in a boat, and whoever wants to go and do whatever they want, but they take them out. 12 miles off? Once you're in international waters, you're out there. Now, what happens is when they're out, he's saying this because I don't know if they were listening to his conversations or whatever. What they do is they chuck these kids overboard. Okay. No witness, no victim, no crime. And I'm thinking to myself, I hate to say this sounds very cold-blooded, but let's face it, if you're abusing children or child trafficking, this is not that far-fetched. All right?
Except, and you had me up until the chucking part because the Ocala has a deep history of child and adult human trafficking.
Right.
And you wouldn't chuck because that's chucking. That's literally throwing money off the boat.
Well, in this case, and he says it like that, but I'm thinking this is not, but it's not, if you think though that you might have how can I tell you, if you have a client that says, I don't want any loose ends. Okay. Sorry. If I'm paying for this party, I don't want anything, anything. It's not implausible. Let me tell you. Anyway,
yeah, I mean, I'm with you, I'm with you except for the fact that I don't think it's financially beneficial to do it. In other words, that person who's making that request is in so deep with the society that they understand that's money lost.
Well, the way I looked at it when I heard that, I wouldn't say this is your average child molester on the corner. Chester the child molester. Right. I'm looking at it as if somebody can pay to take out some type of yacht or something out into international waters, we're talking somebody that's got deep pockets. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I would also agree that I think that paying extra to kill those children is not out of the realm as well.
This is somebody that's like
that being part of the thrill. It's so weird when we hear echoes of this type of thing and it makes sense to us. And then, like I said a little bit ago, when you start to just absorb the number of times that the Ocala is mentioned in terms of disappearances, in terms of he was last seen. It's funny, like I listen to almost as much, probably more true crime podcasts than I listen to spooky podcasts. And if it mentions Florida, I'm like, it's just really.
Let me ask you something. What can you tell me about the Rainbow family?
So the Rainbow people, they start in the early 70s here.
Yes.
And they are, and I want to start off by saying that a true Rainbow person is amazing. And so for people who don't know, they are people who across the country and around the world get together in national forests, and they have essentially what amounts to a week where it's very much like Burning Man. Like, they come with limited resources, they share the resources, there's music playing. Of course, there's a lot of psychedelic drugs and things like that are going on, but it's this communal living, getting away from all of the trappings of the modern world, getting in touch with nature. Historically, even the Ocala Rainbow people have had very little run-ins with the law. As a matter of fact, in most places, not so much in Florida, but in most places, the rangers are almost always every year waiting for something to happen and waiting to bust them on something. But it doesn't happen. Now, in Florida, they don't go away. And so there is a faction of rainbow people who are up to what might be considered sketchier things. They're not true rainbow people. They just wear the clothes and walk in the circles. Then there are other occult and cult members who attach themselves to the rainbow people.
Sure.
Or identify themselves as rainbow people but aren't. Those are the people that are causing the problems in the forest. Those are the ones who are running the drugs. Those are the ones who are running the people. There are several cases of, and I would have my notes with me to tell you, like, I've got case after case after case, these names. When I said I was writing a ghost book about the Ocala, I had, dozens of people who contacted me who wanted me to look into the missing person cases of different people.
Right.
That are not rainbow people, but they look like them, they act like them, they've infiltrated them. And so they are identified as rainbow people, and even outsiders were being like, rainbow people.
Because they don't know if they don't know any better.
Right, because they don't know. Like, what, I'm a teacher, right? If I go in and a troublemaker is with a whole bunch of good kids, and the troublemaker is causing trouble, I assume everyone's causing trouble, right?
Right.
And so there's an association that happens there that's unfair at times. But that said, you still don't go to like the towns. You still don't go to like Astor or DeLand or like Paisley and buy deodorant from the CVS without checking it to make sure rainbow people haven't used it first. So.
Well, did you hear about the one that got? I want to say it's been 2 years now. He got killed. Supposedly they're out in Ocala, and some guys drive up in a pickup truck, shoot him, and leave.
Yeah, it's an uneasy balance because.
Well, you know what? There's more to this. This guy is with a group of people, and this is what I've heard. I haven't followed up on the story.
Yeah.
Supposedly these 2 or 3 pickup trucks, I don't know, a bunch of guys come and they kill this guy in front of everybody. They leave, and nobody knows anything. The police have interviewed all the people there, and nobody knows, can't remember, one of those. Like, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, this guy wasn't done away with by himself, where there's no witnesses.
Yeah.
So that leads me to believe that it was one of those, like, let me just shut up.
Yeah. And I think it sounds to me, and I don't know the details of the case that you're talking about, so I'd love for you to send me the information.
Sure.
To me, it sounds like one of those situations where the townie people were associating the rainbow person with a crime against someone that they knew. And it sounds probably, just by your basic description, like the young kid who disappeared a few years ago without his dog. And that's what happens, right? You associate a crime that happened to you with this rainbow person. So whether that rainbow person is the one that did it or not, that's who you vent your anger to.
Okay.
I should say.
Well, I'll tell you what, this was right. This was back in, I'll tell you real quick, February of 2021. I knew that it was.
Yeah, that's actually fairly recent. Yeah.
It was fairly recent. And that's why when I looked at that, as a matter of fact, it was around this time that I realized I had no idea what the rainbow people were.
Yeah.
And there was a shooting. And I'm looking at this now, I still think it's still like unsolved. Nobody's ever been arrested for it. And
and that's kind of stuff that happens because they're associated unfairly. I think for most of them, they're associated with this sinister element that is lurking within them. That I mean, if you were going to, you had a certain mindset, cult or occult mindset,
right,
and you wanted to recruit, someone who is a rainbow person who's going to these festivals, is highly suggestible. Odds are they're on some kind of drug. They are as easy a victim to influence to a new way of thinking to
right.
get them into your cult as possible. So there's just a lot of moving parts with the rainbow people and what they could be. And the most interesting part of it, so now keep in mind, I'm not an investigative journalist. I'm not I'm a folklorist. What it does is it adds to this mindset of people who live in the Ocala, and then, like I call it, in the shadow of the Ocala, all those towns that are right outside of it.
Exactly, around the perimeter, yes.
They have the what I call like the Ocala disorder, where one woman tells me a story, and by woman I mean she was like 20 at the time I talked to her.
Okay.
And there's it's the introduction to my book because I think it sets the tone.
Okay.
She tells me all these crazy stories, and they all happen on one night, maybe. And all of them are connected to the Ocala, and maybe it's rainbow people, and maybe it's ghosts, and maybe it's witches who are in the woods, and it's one of those things where because so much does happen, they believe anything can happen, like we were talking about earlier, and so the rainbow people become a target for that because they're the most easily recognizable ones, but also they're the ones that people seem to have used in one way or another to get a lot of weird stuff going in that forest.
Right. And then again, sometimes you think, is it because it might not have anything to do with it. Maybe he crossed the wrong person.
Right. You don't know.
Sometimes you might try looking at some weird angle, and sometimes it's just a question of you crossed the wrong person.
He looked at the girlfend the wrong way.
There you go. Exactly.
You don't know, but because it involves all those elements, our minds go, because we who look at the Ocala, as well as those who live in the Ocala, are still victims of that syndrome.
Oh, yeah. I've traveled through the Ocala all the time. I'm very, very close to it. So, and you hear all these things, and I mean, especially when you talk to the people around here that have been here for a really long time, because usually Ocala National Forest was known for hunting, for hunters. This is where you would go to hunt. Especially if you were going for the wild pigs and the deers and things like that. I mean, I had family back in the 70s who lived in Tampa, which is where they would come to hunt, would be in Ocala National Forest. This was the place to come to. There's not so much maybe now, but there was a lot of what's the word, if you want to, not folklore, but it was like people took care of business, and sometimes they didn't call the law. How's that?
Sure. Yeah, it was, if Florida is the Wild West, right? Yeah. Post Wild West, because everyone who got into trouble in the West came to Florida to escape, right? There's a lot of frontier justice. We think even when we talk about like the Seminole Wars and the Seminole tribe themselves and things like that, we think we're talking, like Squanto and the Wampanoags from the 1600s, and we're not. We're talking like 150 years ago, 60 years ago. This is Florida was the place that no one really wanted, right? Like it was
right. No, you had a lot of people coming in like post Civil War,
right? And so
because like you said, like cheap land, like go out there.
Leading into the Seminole Wars, they had a Homestead Act where the president basically was like, if you promise to work the land and to put people on it and help us out if the Seminoles get too crazy, you can have 500 acres near Tampa for free. Just take it. Just make sure you're like,
we just want somebody to settle it.
Exactly. As long as you settle it and work it and, like promise that if something happens, you got our back. This is the territory of sketchy people, right?
Well, this is as far back, not that turn of the century. I'm talking here from the, like 1900.
Yeah.
Off the west coast of Florida on the Everglades, on the southern portion, there's 10,000 Island. There's an area called Chokoloskee, and people had like sugar
Yeah.
plantations and all this. And what you would have is you would have outlaws go out there because it was so mosquito infested that the law usually didn't want to follow you there.
That's about like 2 miles from where I am right now, by the way.
Really? Okay, there you go.
So, one of my favorite stories that I always bring in is about a cop in Punta Gorda, Florida, who's killed, and and he's for all intents and purposes, no one in the world other than the jury thinks that this guy did it. A guy by the name of Isaiah Cooper, and his it's a really long story, but his sentence is eventually commuted. And so he is now serving life in prison, but not being hung. And so he's sent off to this work camp, this famously, notoriously vicious work camp in DeLand, right? In DeLand, Florida. So on the edge of the Ocala, right? And he's working the land, and he looks up at the guy who's on the horse with the gun watching him, laughs, and runs into the swamp. And now, whether you think it was an inside job, which maybe it was, or just this is the story. The cop said, the guard said, I was going to chase him into the woods, but I didn't want to ruin my new shoes.
Yeah, man, those new shoe things. You know what they used to have around here, the area that they would use convicts labor for? Turpentine.
Yeah,
they would farm turpentine, and they said it was brutal work.
So what would happen is, especially in the area, one of the other projects, this is hand in hand with the Lake Panasoffkee one, because the town that Lake Panasoffkee is in, most people would say it's Bushnell, right?
Right, yeah.
It's actually a town called Pemberton Ferry.
Okay.
And Pemberton Ferry is a town that even people who lived in Pemberton Ferry, when it went under, don't remember for some reason the town of Pemberton Ferry. Like, it's literally, if you know Brooksville.
Yes, I do.
It is the sister city of Brooksville, and it was the more successful of the towns.
Okay.
And this is, by the way, this is a spooky thing in terms of the other stuff I'm covering with it, but it's really the story of these towns in Florida.
Yes.
It started to rise up, and then one thing or another, one town gets more popular, the other town goes down. And so it's Pemberton Ferry, which was much more successful originally than Brooksville. Once it starts to fail, enter the New Deal, and the government was just confiscating miles and miles of land. And so the federal government took over much of Sumter County and mined it for turpentine, and then left and completely wiped out the history of a lot of the things that were on that land. And that happens when I talk Central Florida, I always talk Central Florida, not Central Florida, not Orlando, but the things that are not
from north to south.
Right.
The thing is, people out here, there's been the phosphate mining. And I mean, there came a point where, and of course, like the citrus industry also, but believe it or not, back in 1885, they had a freeze. I've seen pictures of icicles hanging. And as far as when you were saying about people coming down here, what they were farming was a lot of times was citrus, not all the time, but it was citrus. Remember once upon a time, Florida was a big citrus state until the canker took over.
Well, and that freeze is another one that happened about 20 years later.
Yes,
really put the kibosh on it. And
it did. It did.
A lot of people don't realize, which is why now Arcadia South is really where the citrus is, and it's no longer in Tangerine and Citrus County, like these places that were historically people got wise, and that was replaced, like you were saying, with turpentine, with phosphorus, which was like finding gold, and then oddly enough, celery and artichokes.
Yes. Celery Avenue. There's it's like an unusual thing. Most people don't know that about as far as.
I think I could actually almost write a book called Celery Hauntings, because I have enough ghost stories that revolve around celery.
Yes.
That could almost constitute their own book, because people don't realize.
What is it? Is it Sanford? Isn't it out of Sanford that they have the celery?
Yeah,
Celery
except
Road.
The Phantom White Horse on
The
Celery
Phantom
Road.
White Horse that was buried there.
Yep.
But you know what? It's really funny because like when you were talking about roads, like I grew up in South Florida. I mean, I was all over Florida, but I grew up.
Yeah.
You were talking about in Massachusetts, well, in Ocala, but in Massachusetts, well, that Fall River area where these areas are used as dumping grounds. South Florida, there's that US 41 that connects between the east and the west coast
Tamiami.
of
Yep.
Miami Trail. Let me tell you something. That was infamous for many, many, many years. This is before the cocaine wars in Miami. I'm talking way before as a dumping
Yeah.
ground.
Yeah.
If the insects, the crocodile, or I mean the alligators or the insects didn't get it, don't worry about it, because if they ever found anything, there was no way you would have remnants of remains.
Yeah, I was just talking to my students today because they were talking about there's a road right where we are, which goes parallel with 41 called Burnt Store.
Yes.
It actually intersects at some point with 41.
Yes.
And I was talking to my kids about Burnt Store Road, and they were saying something I was like, oh, you're like, that was, we used to call that Serial Killer Row. And I'm like, well, why was that? I'm like, because serial killers were known to dump bodies onto the side of the road of Burnt Store Road because the hogs would just eat everything.
Yeah.
And so, it was notorious. And I had a brother-in-law who worked for Progressive, who would say that stretch of road, Burnt Store Road, had more accidents on the weekend due to hitting hogs and hitting animals than any road in the state. It's no coincidence. As I'm finding these ghostly legends, and as I start to do this work, I start to uncover all these towns, these small towns with their own ghost stories.
Oh yeah,
it's no coincidence that I can, when I drive down 41, 41 to me is there's this ghostly legend, and there's that ghostly legend, and there's that ghostly legend. When I go down 17,
right,
it's the same thing. Like, yep. There's the Richardson children, and we're coming up on Bloody Bucket, and like,
yes,
that these two roads, which are off of the main road, they snake through these small towns, or the heartbeats of these small towns. 17 more small town because, do you call Sarasota and Venice and these places?
Well, that US 27 was called, even by the troopers at the time, Bloody 27.
I didn't know that. No.
Yes. And because back then, remember the turnpike and all these highways, this is more modern times. Right. Usually these roads that were basically sometimes going through desolate areas, whether it was the Everglades or just in the middle of nowhere, these were the 2-lane highways. That's how tourists got around. And usually, you had 41 to take you from the East Coast out west to where Naples and all that area was. But yeah, US 27 was known as Bloody 27.
And what does 27 run through?
US 27, it'll take you straight into Miami. But if you take it meanders through Central Florida. It'll take you around Okeechobee Lake. Okay. And those little towns that are around Okeechobee Lake. And then it comes out and it'll keep on like US 27.
It follows basically the same trail as 17.
Well, 17 is a little bit more on the west coast.
I was going to say, but more towards the east. Yeah. So like it goes Clewiston, Moorhaven, places like that.
It goes through Clewiston and then it starts gumming up north. Okay. And it takes you like through Immokalee, Belglade. It keeps going. All these little towns, like you said, some of them are barely clung on. Some are gone.
Yeah.
Forget it. Yeah, and then some of them, actually took off, as far as, but
that's where you come across towns like Laredo, which is literally just Florida with the F chopped off. Which is a ghost town, right? You come across like Anderson, all of these places, which I do a story about a coyote woman, right? Okay. And it's this ghostly legend that's told in this one section of the Ocala. Actually, I can bring up the picture if you want.
Yes, send it over to me.
Boop, boop, boop. Let's see. Is she in here? There she is. And so it's told, it takes place in the town of Wildwood. Wildwood, Florida.
Mm-hmm. That's where the turnpike ends.
Except for the fact there is no Wildwood, Florida. In Lake County, there isn't, right?
Yeah.
because no one can quite get the town. The best I can identify is that it happens in Paisley.
Okay.
On the way to Lake Door, from Paisley to Lake Door. But that area itself, and I could do, if you want me, I can tell you the legend. I can tell you the coyote woman.
Yes, of course.
So the story goes that she falls in love. She's 13, 14 years old. She falls in love with this older man.
Okay.
And her parents Rosewood, Florida is what I'm saying. Not Wildwood, Rosewood.
Okay.
Wildwood definitely exists. Trust me.
Okay.
This is Rosewood, Florida. She falls in love with this older teenager who's 17, 18 years old, and her parents flip out because he's black, right?
Okay.
And so they absolutely refuse, especially the father, to allow them to be with each other. And she sneaks out of her house, and he sneaks out of his house, and they meet in this cemetery in Rosewood. Okay. And, they kiss, and I'm sure that's all they do is kiss and hold hands, because that's all teenagers ever do. Her father finds out, and he threatens to send her away. The mom convinces her to not, but there's so much anger in him that he's walking through town and he sees the kid and he starts to beat him to death.
Oh my God.
And no one in the town is helping, right? No one is like
interfering in this.
Right. The white people in the area are forming a circle cheering it on. The African Americans in the area are like too nervous.
He brought it on himself. Yeah, they're like.
And so he drags him off into the woods, and he's never seen again. Some people say he leaves the state or he goes down to Miami. Mm-hmm. Other people say that he's dead, he's killed and like just left in the woods.
Right.
She's walking through town a little time later. She sees the blood, and she's asking people, what's going on with this? Like, what? And no one will answer her. And she finally gets out that he has beaten to death this man who she loves. And she's like, well, why didn't anybody help him? And she's like, and they're all kind of like half laughing, half, embarrassed. And so she runs back home, gets her father's gun. And when her father comes home, she, says the name of the man she loves, and she shoots him 3 times.
Oh boy. And
she's completely now freaked out. She's killed her father. She knows that something bad's going to happen. She knows her mom is going to come home and she can't stand to see her mom. So she runs to the only place that is safe for her, which is this cemetery.
Okay. And
she lies down on the grave and she's bawling her eyes out. And as she starts to cry, a pack of coyotes start to circle the cemetery.
Okay.
And she's crying louder and louder, and they're circling faster. And now they're howling. And now she's screaming with grief. And the scream is mixing with these howls to make this weird kind of sound. And finally, it's too much, and she puts the gun to her head and she kills herself.
Wow.
Except for the fact that she transforms, almost like a Wendigo, she transforms into this half woman, half coyote, and jumps into the pack and disappears. And it's said that she still stalks that woods looking for men who do bad things. That's the way that it's phrased in the story. And that's to account for a lot of the disappearances that are in that area.
Okay.
And one of the things to do in that area is they go to the cemetery, they lie on the graves, they cross their arms like this, as they're lying on these graves, and they wait to hear the coyotes. And the last person to leave the cemetery, to not freak out by doing this and leave the cemetery, is the winner, right? He's the big man.
Yes.
And so you think it's a story, it's a folklore, it's a cautionary tale. The name Rosewood probably comes from Rosewood, Florida, which is on the West Coast,
right?
Which is the site of the famous Rosewood Massacre, where they burnt an African-American town to the ground after this shootout and everything. So there's a racial thing there that might have transferred over into this story.
Right.
But this kid says him and his friends used to do it, and every time they did it, they would hear the coyotes. There would be nothing, and then all of a sudden, as soon as they
what's out there? Is it like a family cemetery, or is it an actual?
That's what kind of got me talking about it, because they say Rosewood, but some say it's Paisley. Yet it used to be called Shockley, Florida. And Shockley is actually the name, if you can see kind of slightly the smaller picture down here. Shockley is the name of that cemetery because the Shockley family, which it's a family cemetery, is they used to run the town. So before it was Paisley, before it was anything else, it was kind of known as Shockley Settlement. So
right. Yeah, that's what you got for establishing a settlement.
Exactly,
yeah,
and that's
things got named after your family.
Exactly. So you have places like Deltona was called Saulsville. You know what I'm saying? Like
yes.
You have all of these places, especially in Central Florida, that were named after the person with the most money or the biggest plantation, the biggest settlement, until it became something else. So when you're tracking these legends, they hit on different towns.
Right. That's why you have all these somethingville, town.
Exactly.
That some variation.
And you're looking for a town name that no one has called it that for 100 years,
yeah.
And it's gone through several different things. Like one of my favorites is a ghost story out of the Panhandle in a place that's called the name of the town used to be called Coon Hill, but now it's like called Chickamauga. But now it's not really called that; it's called something else. And so you're trying to track this legend that you hear about this place, and you're like, it's 3 towns away from what it used to be called when the story starts.
Right, because that was the thing. Also, some of these names were official, but not really. Like everybody knew what the name of the town was.
Yeah. So even a place like I was saying, Narrator, which is spelled Florida. It's like I always say it's called Lorda, Florida. It was originally Istapoca, but then the other town on the other side of Lake Istapoca, they wanted to call themselves Istapoca.
Yes.
So then it was called Cooper, and then it was called Sunnyvale, and then it was called until they finally settled on Narrator. But who gives a crap? Because 20 years later, the town went under. Right,
and I know sometimes when they got a post office, it was a big deal because that meant you were like,
and the power that post office had to name that area was absolute.
Yes, exactly.
So Narrator, Florida was named by the postmistress, and what this does is it creates not only an atmosphere for folklore because, people say that Narrator, Florida went under because of a witch's curse, right?
Really?
That there's a witch and there's an amazing story having to do with that. But the fact of the matter is it was a small little town. World War II happened. Half the people who lived in the town went to go fight in World War II. And like 90% of those people, once they got a taste of what life was like outside Florida, they ain't never coming back. Like some of them died in the war, and the other ones went, why would I go back to this small little town in Florida now that I have a taste of what the world is?
Sure.
And so the town started to fail. And as it got worse and worse, they put more and more emphasis on this witch who had died in the town. And so, boom.
They cursed it.
What did it say?
No, she cursed them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what happened was that one of the men in the town approached her and wanted a love potion.
Okay.
And so she agreed to make him this love potion. They met at the bridge over Arbuckle Creek, and she upped the ante. This is the story. She upped the ante, and instead she wanted his firstborn child for this love potion.
Oh, boy.
And he completely flipped out, and he ended up throwing her off the bridge where she gets impaled on a tree that's in the swampy water, right?
Okay.
He pulls her out. He weighs her body down, and he takes off. He's supposedly never seen again. The townspeople find her because her body doesn't stay,
right. It floats up.
It floats back up. And so they take her out, and they had been using her for her remedies and all this stuff like that for years, right? But then when it comes time to kind of honor her afterwards, they're like, she can't come into our cemeteries. She can't. So they kind of bury her in town, but not in a cemetery. There's no.
Let me tell you, back then they were real particular who they allowed to be buried in a cemetery.
Now people driving on that stretch of road, in Arbuckle, driving over this bridge over Arbuckle Creek, start seeing her ghost on the bridge.
Interesting.
And they're driving through her. They're getting into car accidents, trying to swerve not to hit her. As this is happening, more and more people are leaving town and more businesses are going under. And so they're like, it's got to be because of the witch. So they do the only thing that they consider honorable, which is they dig up her body and they bury her in a different town, right?
We're still not going to bury her in a cemetery.
Right. So it's great. So but no, the sightings keep going on. The sightings keep happening. The sightings keep happening. So they dig her up again, but this time they burn her, they cremate her, and they scatter her ashes in another county. The haunting is still happening. The ghost is still being seen on the bridge.
It's like
they eventually burn her house down, the shack that she used to live in.
Right.
But it's too late. The town goes under. The ghost is still there at the bridge. There's also maybe the ghost of the man who killed her and his son.
Oh my God!
Still at that bridge. The story remains. The ghost remains, but the town is not there anymore.
It's gone.
It's gone.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I love those stories.
And the moral of the story is two things. One, if you're going to build a town, don't build it on Lake Istapoca, which means the land where people die, the water where people die. That's what it means in Seminole. So never build your town next to the lake where people die.
Right.
And two, and this works a lot better when my kids are here to do the punchline, and number two, never fall in love.
Thank you. It's like, yeah, that'll work. No.
Yeah. Well,
so
if you remember the old Woody Woodpecker cartoons, if Woody had just gone to the police, none of this ever would have happened.
Of course.
If you had not wanted to fall in love, you could have saved the entire town. But unfortunately,
it's like you. Yeah, you know what? It's really funny though, but you always hear those love potions. Things always go wrong somehow.
Always go wrong, right? You can't mess with fate, and you can't mess with love.
Sure.
Even the genie in Aladdin says you can't make someone love you.
Right, exactly. I think that's very. I'm gonna circle back all the way back to real quick.
Yeah,
Chris, to the original, which was that the Fall River murders.
Yeah.
Okay. Because you have an inside scoop on this that was missing. Like I said, it's so fresh in my mind because I saw it. Do you really think then, because both of these people are in jail?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's important to note that Robin Murphy is not in jail for the murders, though.
Right. No. Well, she went and then she got out. What was it? Why was it that she was sent back in? She violated her parole somehow.
Yes, violated her parole. So she violated her parole less than 10 years ago because it happened after my book. She was still in jail, waiting to be paroled. Was paroled when I moved down here to Florida, and then she violated her parole somehow by committing another crime. And so she's back more for her parole violation than for
that actual crime.
Right. And then I believe there were other crimes that were attached to it.
Right. She was out for a while though. She didn't go right back in. She was out for a while, for a few years when she got released.
Not too long because, I haven't been down here in Florida that long, but she was probably out for maybe 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. She didn't go, you would think, man, you would never catch her doing anything to go back in. But do you think, because they make it look like, because if you look at the thing, basically she's saying that as she's growing up in this dysfunctional household and she's being molested, this is as a teenager before she becomes, that she tried telling, but nobody cared. And that's basically why she became so hard-hearted. I don't know what to call it. Yeah. Do you think that she was really involved in either of those?
Yeah. Oh yeah. She was responsible for all. In my opinion, she was responsible for all of the.
But she recanted. She said a story.
The Carl Drew murders should be called should be called the Robin Murphy murders. Yeah.
Right, and it makes you think that because she recanted, but she tried to. The way they presented it, how's this? Yeah. Whereas she basically threw everybody under the bus, but later on she recanted, almost saying I was told by the prosecutor to say this stuff.
All the information I have from the people who worked the case, the people who knew, the people involved, Robin Murphy was the mastermind.
Right.
She was the one who was pulling the strings. She was a master manipulator. She had psychological and sexual control over men and women. She was innocent enough to let her in. She had the cops post when the murders start.
Well, one of the women that's murdered is supposedly her lover.
Everyone was a lover.
Right. Well, she's.
No, I'm with you, but it's like
that you would think. nobody, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
That was it
but it's
didn't
also important to
protect her,
understand that
in other
all of
words.
that area, it was very free and loose. The relationships, everybody knew everybody. Like
Right.
to think that anyone could have done anything in that community, and not everyone would know about it is crazy. You know what I'm saying? Like they talk about Kenny Pont, who is the lawyer that comes down to Florida in that
Right.
story. Everyone
Yes.
knew everything what was going on with him. Everyone knew that he was making child pornography. Everyone knew that he was running drugs. What's his name? DeSilvo, who is the cop, I'm sorry, not the cop, the DA, right?
Yes.
Who's so tough, he backs down on a lot of this stuff because his wife, who is a newscaster, gets busted several times in sketchy situations in
Oh boy.
cocaine deals. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah. There's
it's just it's Shakespearean mixed with true ghetto lifestyle of like
right.
with the outlaw, with these people who have nothing to lose. Everyone knows everyone's business.
Right.
That's why it didn't take forever for them to solve the Big Dan case, because everyone knew who it was, because everyone was in the bar that night. You know what I'm saying? Like, these are
Right. Well, you know what? It almost looks like everybody there had done something, and it was like
exactly
the guy that ended up in jail. What's his name? Drew, or what was his name?
from
The
from that from Carl Drew. Are you talking about? Are you talking about
yes,
the big? Yeah, Carl Drew.
Carl Drew. It's almost like like I said, he's illiterate or was illiterate. But it's like you did enough things that it wasn't hard to persuade a jury to believe
And
that you
the
did it.
sad thing is, and we're talking about a man who is now in his 60s, right? I
Yeah,
mean, we're talking
yeah.
40
He's an
years ago
old
at
guy
least.
now.
It's funny how many people will say to you from that area that, yeah, well, if it wasn't, it's not like he was clean or anything. It's not like he didn't. And I'm like, yeah, except for the fact that your mom bought coke from him. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Right.
and you're saying it's okay that he didn't kill anybody, but it still served 40 years because he was a bad guy when he was 22 busted heads over prostitutes and drugs. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Right.
your family knew him. You know what I'm saying? Like, your father used to
Exactly.
like
That's
your
the
father used to pick up one of the. So it's this really weird mindset. People, when they think of Massachusetts, they think of like South Boston and the movies they see about South Boston and stuff.
right.
South Boston ain't like that anymore, but you know what is? Like the Fall River, New Bedford area. Like,
Right.
everyone knows everyone. Everyone has something on everyone. And it's like, it's like that perfect balance that if one brick falls, there's going to be a lot of things going tumbling. And so no one touches any of the bricks because everyone knows something. And everyone knows
Yeah,
that
that like that game Jenga, don't pull that out because you never
exactly.
know.
Exactly. So
Yes. And
it's a delicate balance, and then every once in a while, and it's not even every once in a while, right? Like the whole point, even though it gets derailed of that documentary, is this town of Fall River, and I always include Fall River, New Bedford together,
right.
um, as part of kind of a very similar syndrome to the Ocala. They rise and they fall. They rise and they fall. Like, Fall River is mentioned, or New Bedford's. It's Fall River, New Bedford that are mentioned in Moby Dick, right? Like, it's this great whaling
Right.
town. So it's got to be New Bedford, which is the whaling city. All of my friends are going to kill me for not remembering which one it is. And instead they fall. They're supposed to rise. They're supposed to be great. These great ports. And then they
Right.
fall. Or there's these great places of culture, and then they fall. And it cycles through these unexplained sociological rises and falls and failures that the places around them don't.
Well, this is the thing. At the end of the thing, like I said, at the beginning it's very intriguing because they're putting that satanic cult thing, and then at the end they're kind of saying, well, you know what? There's so much. There's churches, especially the Catholicism. Like, there's a lot of religion here, which made it easy to believe of the satanic angle. And I'm thinking to myself, come on, stop blaming it on too many churches, or people having religious beliefs.
Yeah, and
Okay.
the funny thing is that in all of that, they don't really talk about the voodoo background of the Portuguese people and of the Cape Verdeans is what I was thinking of. People that are in that area, that is deeply influenced in the understanding. So a lot of the crime that was coming out of that, I just briefly mentioned, there are multiple reports of zombie-like creatures and zombie-like people in the Fall River, Freetown State Forest, because once again you've got that voodoo. So you've got people who believe that they can come back from the dead and be controlled, and if we're assuming that's not real, that comes out of this idea. So
people don't realize that sympathetic magic thing, when you think of the voodoo doll, and that if you get somebody's hair or something that belongs to them and you stick it on the doll, that's sympathetic magic, and you stick pins in it or whatever, you could have things happen. That you see that in different, we call it voodoo, but that sympathetic magic, you see it in a lot of the how can I say, the official religion might be Catholicism, okay? But sometimes there's like an underground or cultish type of belief in that sympathetic magic, where you could do something to somebody with that.
I was explaining this to my students because we're in a folklore section now.
Okay,
like religion's got you covered for the big things, saving your soul, heaven, hell, like all this kind of stuff like that. But if your crops are crappy, you're turning to folk magic, right? You're turning to oral superstitions and things like that, and that's where a lot of these ghost stories and a lot of these variations on major monotheistic religions come from. Is this idea that like God ain't gonna help with that rash that's on your ass? So like, you know what you gotta do for that? You gotta rub 2 crow eggs together, and you know what I'm saying? Like,
okay.
Do you understand? Like, so the religion's got the big things covered, but folk magic is
Chris, let me ask you something, and maybe you can come back are you familiar at all with the powwowing out in Pennsylvania, their witchcraft?
No, not overly. Yeah, no.
Oh my God. See, that's a whole nother thing that when I was looking at that, I was like, huh? They have their own, it's a mixture of Christianity and spells and hexes and
well, that's really what Santeria and voodoo are as well. You know what I'm saying?
And certain
they're hidden, and I always mispronounce. I've got like 5 or 6 black holes in my brain for certain things. One of them is I can never remember what you call a woman who delivers babies. In like rural areas. Like it's not a
like midwife.
A midwife. That's okay. Now ask me that 5 minutes from now, and I won't remember the word.
Okay, I have those myself. That all of a sudden it's the word. I know it, but it escapes me.
And I know it's not the word, but I always want to call it Palo Alto, but it's not Palo Alto. But it's the origins of both voodoo and Santeria come from this. And I always mispronounce the word, but I know it's like that. That stuff is just that or those early.
There's Palomayombe. Palomayombe is.
There you go, Palomayombe. That is voodoo is just that with saints instead of
right. And what happens is like in Brazil, it's called candomblé. It's each region, especially when you had the African diaspora go, they kind of did that mix of Catholicism and whatever religion they had going on, and they did do it's similar, but they have their own version because, of course, wherever you're at, in Brazil, you've got the Portuguese,
and you had to hide it, right? You had to hide it from the
you see. That's why you see a lot of the Catholic saints, for example. Right. You'll say in Santeria, Saint Barbara is Chango, with it, even though it's a female saint. It's it translates into the male god of he's a deity, he's not a god, I take that back, of Orisha, or whatever you want to call it, Santo of thunder. Okay, in other words, they kind of like, because if you were praying to the statue, you were good, you didn't get in trouble. How's that?
Right, exactly. And so it was very easy for those.
And then what happens is that exactly like what you were saying, you wanted a love potion, you wanted to hex that enemy, you wanted to do that, you couldn't go to your priest and go, by the way, I want that woman. Make me a potion.
Yeah, that's like, what are you
gonna do?
I think I remember something. If you want her with your eyes, you're supposed to rip your eyes out. No, dude, I want to like get her out.
Like, right. Or, hey, you know what? That guy did me wrong in business. I want to put a curse on his business or his land or his farm animals. The priest is going to look at you and go, what?
Florida has a history, and I think the stories influence each other. Florida has a history of towns failing because of turning to the witches. So you have a place like Pemberton Ferry. There's one particular area which is now known as Hog Island. You have that same story, which is different towns on the Swanee River. You have that same story in some of the old turpentine towns and railroad towns in DeSoto County, and you have it in Narrator, Florida, because it's very easy when then things change to say, my God, why have you forsaken me? And say, oh, we shouldn't have been allowing her into our community.
Well, it's the scapegoat thing. Yeah. You need a scapegoat.
So that scapegoat factor has been used time and time again for these boom towns all throughout Florida once they go under. And that adds to the haunted history of the state, because then along with that always goes a ghost story, because she's always still in that area and she's always coming to get you.
Of course, because back then people don't realize that. And even now, I'm going to take that back. We always say in the good old days, people were superstitious and believed in stuff like that. Come on, nowadays, people, same thing.
Yeah.
You still get...
it's funny because we were doing that and all the kids were laughing. And so I took them all out into the hallway. I have an outdoor campus.
Okay.
So I took them out to the outdoor campus, and right in front of I don't know if it was because of Ian or whatever, but there's a crack in the cement near my room, near the entrance to my room.
Okay.
And I went, all right, then, why don't you step on that crack on the way back into the room? And the kids wouldn't do it, right?
I was like, just in case.
That's not real. And I do the same thing with them every year. Every year they go blah, 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 but they won't do it. I'm like, I'll give you extra credit right now. I'll give you an A in the class right now. Go to the bathroom and go say Bloody Mary into the mirror, or do it tonight and film it and bring it in tomorrow. And they all joke and they all say, of course I'll do it. And I have yet to have a video of any of my students in 10 years of doing that lesson that bring me back anything that's like that, right? Or that do any of these things. They talk big, and yet in the back of their mind, that rural ritual magic still is very impactful, and still those superstitions, stepping on a crack or conjuring Candyman even, or flashing their lights a certain way at a certain intersection, still plays on their minds.
Well, as a parting shot, I'm going to give you this story. This I heard recently. This priest is being interviewed. This was a few days ago, and he was interviewed like maybe a couple of months ago. This is not like once upon a time. He is one of the major exorcists for the Catholic Church.
Sure.
Out of the Vatican. We're not talking. He's the for real thing as far as the Vatican approved. He starts talking about how he's talking about different cases he's had of exorcisms, right? So he describes how one priest, who's also an exorcist, brings him a woman for exorcism. And, one of the things, I think that what the other priest was like, can you find out if she's really possessed, or are we talking mental illness? One of those deals, consult. Make a long story short. The lady, turns out that he did believe she had some type of possession, but in contrary to what like what he describes, the possession is not like what you see in the Exorcist movie where people do weird stuff. He describes how this lady put a curse on him, and he gets a very bad case of gout. Okay. For anybody it's a very painful, it's a painful condition, like when you get your big toe. For anybody that doesn't know what gout is, it can be really painful, and you have to be careful what you eat, and it's the way your body processes. Oh my God, acidic? No, is it? I can't remember what type of.
Right, and usually it stems from when you had chicken pox or the mumps or something.
Or something like that. Whatever. He says it was super painful, and he couldn't understand why he had gotten it. The lady goes off, never comes back. He's still not making this connection. He says, usually I would know what would trigger it, as far as diet, if I had eaten something. Finally, he says that it just dawns on him that this happened right after he has this interview talk with this woman.
Yeah.
And what he says, he talks about how he basically did an exorcism over his foot. Okay.
Yeah.
Voila, it's done. The next few days, he talks to the original priest who had sent this lady to see him. And the original priest tells him, look, I'm sorry I hadn't called you back. But he goes, what? Were you suffering from a case of gout? And the other priest goes, yes. How did you know that? Turns out, I'm telling you, this is a very credible source. This lady basically cursed both of them.
Both of them.
You know,
with gout.
With gout, and they had to do because there's different types of exorcisms and stuff like that. Basically, as a matter of fact, people don't realize that you even have to exercise when you're going to do even the salt and water. Even before you bless, you have to exercise it. And he was, and we're talking here. You would think, somebody who's a priest, not only a priest, but is an exorcist, you would think would be impervious to this kind of thing. Okay, and he wasn't. So when we're talking here about how much is superstition versus how much there is behind some of the superstitious beliefs.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's I always say, especially if there's no kids in the audience, when I'm doing my presentations, I'm like, if you don't think these are real, then why do you feel enlightened and excited when Santa's coming to town and you know there ain't no Santa, right? Sorry for your audience who's still under that impression. Like these things are powerful things, and what happens is we believe in, I think, many curses. Of course, I'm a paranormal guy, so part of it's real, right?
Right.
A lot of this though is power suggestion, stuff like that, and what happens is the outlier case that you're talking about now, which by the mere fact that it's sensational makes it an outlier, makes it abnormal,
right?
Becomes the norm instead. Like we think of it as the norm, and it reinforces the idea that curses can have that kind of power.
Yes.
If that makes sense. So what happened with these priests? I don't have the slightest idea.
Right.
But I do know that more people now are going to believe in God, Jesus, but more importantly, more people are going to believe in curses.
Well, but and you can tell when he's retelling the story, and it was a very interesting interview, among other things. He wasn't connecting my gout to like I got cursed. You know,
yeah, I'm with you. Like a lot of times that happens. People say like, you know what? Like as soon as I took that cemetery dirt. Is when this started to happen, and you start to make the connection there. And of course, the weird thing is it's happening to two different people.
Right. What is the point of origin of all of this?
And once you get by, like, are the people themselves credible, like you were saying, things like that.
Yes.
You're left with this idea of like, well, that's a really weird, unexplained story that reinforces all of the ones that are beyond belief, because I can believe in that one because it makes enough sense. So I can believe in the ones that are more far-fetched because things like this do happen. Look at the twin gouts case. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right, exactly.
And so ultimately, supernatural stories that go above and beyond help to reinforce the ones that make sense to us. So many people can say, I tell the story about a woman who's an African American woman who's killing babies,
right?
And they let her go, and she eventually like goes crazy. And I tell that story, and people go, "Yeah, that makes sense to me." And I'm like, "How does that make sense to you? It's a black woman in Florida killing kids, and you don't think they kill her? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, and they say, well, maybe that, but the idea of the story makes sense to me, right? Like the whole thing of children pushing cars across railroad tracks.
Right. The
story makes no sense whatsoever. It's 100% not true, and there's no cases of it.
Yes.
Of the accident ever occurring. And
exactly.
People say, yeah, but it's a beautiful story, and so it could happen. So
there's one in Florida. There's that other one in San Antonio, outside of San Antonio, where the same. It's like a.
No, it's not. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's often cited as the origin for all this folklore, except for the fact it never happened.
Right, exactly. And it happened not that far back that it couldn't be researched. How's that?
Exactly. There are only 2 examples of fatal train wrecks that involved children, specifically a busload of children.
Sure.
And oddly enough, those two documented cases, there's one out west, and then there's one in somewhere near Buffalo, New York. Those are the two sites that don't have haunted children protecting people on trains.
And things like that, those occurrences would make the headlines usually and would be carried across the United States. All right.
But and I've got people who are hardcore paranormal investigators who consider themselves skeptics and load themselves up with equipment and use words like debunk and client, and yet they say that story all the time as if it's real. And guess what? It took place in their hometown, so they know it's real.
It's like I said, the point of origin, it could be something or somebody total. The usual suspects sometimes are not the usual ones that you expect.
Right.
And that only comes up. Chris, it has been absolutely great to talk to you. And I'm hoping you're going to come back and we can keep talking about all this great stuff.
As long as you don't keep me for 2.5 hours, you can have me back anytime you like.
Oh, let me see. Let me think about that. I'm not going to.
Okay.
I know.
Maybe next time we'll get around to my books.
Yes, I know. Okay,
well, we've got plenty. What I always say is, make it for an interesting conversation. If people find me interesting, they'll find my books. So there you go.
Absolutely. So for my podcast listeners, what's your website?
Best place to go. The website is trippingonlegends.com. But if you go to facebook.com/trippingonlegends, all the stuff ends up there. That's probably the best place to go to. We're no longer a website culture. We're a social media culture. And so facebook.com/trippingonlegends. And on Instagram, it's spooky tripping.
Okay. And your books are what, on Amazon also?
Books are all on Amazon. If you go to any of those social media sites and you direct message me, I can get you a discounted version of the book that's also signed by me.
Wow.
For a pretty gosh darn good price. So you can find it that way as well. And then, of course, you can find the radio show Tripping on Legends wherever you get your podcasts, except for Spotify, because we do video and they don't like that. So.
Okay. I know what you mean. Thank you so much again, Chris. It has been absolutely great. And thank you for, those stories were priceless. As a native Floridian, it's like, my God, this is great.
I think it's great that most of this conversation is based on something that we started 2 minutes before the show, because
I know.
We're connected about that.
Yeah, I know. And I can talk to him. I'm telling you, coincidences. What is it? There's no such thing as coincidences. That I saw that documentary earlier today. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful night.
Likewise. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Yeah. Okay. I'm telling you, that's why I didn't promise if I bring him back, I'm not going to keep him for another 2 hours. He's got a bunch of books. The last one, which I believe he published in 2022, is that one for Ocala National Forest. And again, we could put, that's a forest and everything. But the thing is, around the Ocala National Forest, there's always the major cities in Florida. I'm going to use Florida as an example that everybody's aware of: Jacksonville, Pensacola, Miami, Tampa. But all along throughout Florida, there's all these little towns that some of them disappeared, like you said. They hung out there. A lot of times, if they were on the coast, most of them, if they were in the interior, they were tied into agriculture of some type, whatever the case might be. Like I said, the citrus, and if things went well, then the little towns, some of them, they're still around. I live in one of them. The town I live in has been around since the 1880s, because they just hang on. They hang on. Others, some type of industry, they get lucky. Somebody puts in some type of industry and away it goes. And then others have faded. If you go through there, all you're going to find is maybe like a little sign and maybe a cemetery, but that's it. They've gone. The reason being that people don't realize back then, long distance traveling was a problem. Even if you had a horse and buggy. So basically you had to operate out of your community. And maybe you could go somewhere on a special occasion, but it's not like now that you say, well, I'm going to hop and I'm going to drive right on over there. Back then, these communities had to be self-sufficient. And that's why you had the post office. Maybe you had one hotel, maybe. And there was like around here, I've got all these little towns. I swear, if you're going too fast down the road, You pass right through them. There's like one if they're still there, and I have a few around me. One maybe one traffic light, two if you're lucky. You get a few churches, some that are still left. You can tell by the architecture. Again, these are smaller churches. Why? Because this wasn't like these. You weren't going to get that many people in there because the community was in and of itself small. Um, like in my area, besides the agriculture, is also a lot. Like I said, Ocala's known for the hunting, and there's also the sports fishing, and I mean, there's also what they call micro industries that basically keep some of these. But along the way, you get all these great stories um, about what happened, uh, from all these little towns, and some of the things, believe it or not, he's absolutely right. Some things made the newspapers, some things. The only The only way you would ever find out about it is if it was like, I don't want to say an oral tradition, but basically it was one of those things that was talked about and maybe never printed, depending on the nature of the whatever it was, especially if it was not that good, And then, of course, as everybody dies that knew about that story, there goes the story. Or you might run across it if you're doing really deep research into some type of archives, especially if it's a newspaper that's now defunct. You might run across something and then you take that thing and you run with it and you see what you can find. Like I said, it's really difficult when all the people that were around to witness it are dead and even their children are dead. All right. Like, in other words, it wasn't like, yeah, I remember my grandma or my grandfather told me this and you're still alive. Sometimes this goes so far back that even that avenue of research is like, forget it. So you got to really do a like. But yes, there's a lot of interesting stories. A lot of them, they become urban legends. Absolutely. Like a lot of people know a lot of these urban myths or urban legends. I would say a good 80% of the time there's something in there woven that is true. And then of course it gets embellished and people bring in stuff from other things and just to make it interesting, and before you know it, and then somewhere, unless you know what you're looking for, you miss the part of the true part. Yeah. Um, but I think it's fascinating. And also, like I said, when we started talking right before we started recording that, I told him, "Oh, you know what? He's telling me he's originally from that area, from Boston, from the Northeast, before he moved to Florida." I was like, "Oh my God!" Earlier today, I saw this documentary they had on these murders that occurred like in the '80s up in this area, which is most people think of what's her face, the one that gave the 40 whacks. Fall River, as far as that's the notoriety. I didn't even know about it. And I think of it, now if you ask me big crimes that were going on in South Florida, I could tell you, but it's like the kind of crime that when it's actually happening, only the people in that area know about it. So again, uh, the Fall River, and then you're hearing about the actual objective. Well, I'm going to say the hook at the beginning was that somehow these were satanic activities or satanic killings. But then when you go in there, and they at the beginning they interview some people who are saying absolutely that there was satanic activity or people doing satanic stuff. Um, and they allude to the fact that a couple of the women that were killed were basically sacrifices. But then when it goes further, you realize I'm not saying that there was no satanic stuff going on, especially after what he said about what was going on in that forest. God knows what else went on there. But a couple of these women, which were unfortunately, they were soft targets. They were prostitutes, the drug users, everything around them. It was more like they were murdered more out of they said something to the wrong person or they were afraid that they were going to say something kind of deal. In other words, it was more of a I'm disposing of you not because I'm sacrificing you as a satanic sacrifice. I'm getting rid of you because I'm afraid you might say something or you have said something or something along those lines. It was very interesting, especially to talk to somebody that's very very familiar with the thing. And one of the things I did that I was surprised at the very beginning, they do interview this gentleman that he was at one point law enforcement, but he is consulted on as far as, or he's worked with into investigations that have occult, some type of occult whatever in it. And he absolutely said that what had been done to the bodies did have some type of satanic or occult connection. And then they didn't bring him back. They interview him at the very beginning of the documentary, and then because it's like a 4-part thing, then they didn't bring him back. Like, what else have you seen? Or does this look familiar? Like this case, this case, maybe these victims apparently don't have a connection, but I saw something similar in this other case that leads me to believe, like, hello, help. So I think, it was incredible. That's why I really love talking to him, because sometimes you get the inside scoop. And like he said, basically that the documentary was slanted a certain way. As far as, but by the time you reach the end, you're like, huh? And of course, if you present things a certain way and you omit certain things and you put it this way, and it's like, it's incredible not to come to that conclusion. And you can see that that's what's driving it. And knowing what I know and what I heard and what I observed, yeah, you could say, well, these murders happened because we're talking here, people that were basically living in the underbelly of society, for lack of a better word, drug use, prostitution, criminal activity, you name it. A lot of these girls were throwaways. And the guys, by the way, the guys also, you could tell when they do a background on their childhood, these kids were throwaways. There was nobody there to take care of them. Their family of origins were dysfunctional, is a kind word. And but that there was something there, you know, that, like he said, was it that area that produces this type of behavior? What comes first, the chicken or the egg? Or for somebody that tracks these things, when you see, bad things happen everywhere, but there's a disproportionate amount that happens in a certain area. Because people get killed and dumped, all the time. Like I said, down in the Everglades, that US 41 is infamous for bodies being found years later. And there's tons of them. They haven't even ever identified the person, much less knowing who killed them. So like he said, there's people that would get dumped out in this forest, and they knew they were like from Boston or over there. Like, you're going to dump the body out in this forest, whatever. But I'm sure there's a lot of them that didn't have any occult symbology or occult connection or reference to them. Like I said, sometimes you would have these people that execution style, they get shot in the back of the head, dump them by, you know. I got to bring them back. Yep. I got 20 questions going on. Anyway, guys, I hope you liked this show. I really loved speaking to Chris. I've got a lot of guests. Like I said, season 13 of Stories of the Supernatural already in progress for 2023. I'm already getting that up and ready. I am booked solid with guests. A lot of interesting guests coming on. Like I said, most of them new. I've got a few people coming from way back when. So don't forget to sign up for my Substack newsletter. Go to miamighostchronicles.com or mpellicer.com. Also, all my blogs and everything, if you go to my author page, MP Pellicer, Marlene Pardo Pellicer on Amazon, you're going to find not only all my books, you're going to find all my blogs, because I run them on my author page as well. Okay, or in Goodreads, wherever you go, there I am. Thank you again for coming and spending this time with me. I truly appreciate it. You are all wonderful. Take care.